Hello and welcome to the annual conference of the Small Business Standards Organisation. We're talking today about SMEs and how they can help with growing towards sustainable products. We're going to look at the drivers and we're going to look at the challenges. My name's Jennifer Baker. I'll be your moderator today, guiding you through our panels with our great speakers, but we are delighted to welcome so many of you online from across Europe and perhaps even further afield. Now, in the context of March this year, the European Commission presented a package of initiatives all aimed at ensuring that the EU can meet some of its big targets. Those are the Circular Economy Action Plan and the European Green Deal. And part of this was a plan and a proposal to extend the scope of the current Ecodesign Directive beyond the energy-related products. So to extend that into a regulation and ensure that all sorts of products actually become more resource and energy efficient, that they are durable, reliable, reparable, upgradable, that they can be maintained, they can be refurbished, and they can also, at the end of their lifetime, be recycled. All of these are huge aims, but of course, we know that there's also a new element to this, which is the digital product passport. And like any passport, it's designed to show where something has come from and what its credentials are. And so it can identify the products in most relevant way. It can really tell you about their circularity and their sustainability. So we're going to talk about that. Another two of our panels, we're also going to focus on key sectors, because these two sector-specific initiatives are the EU strategy for sustainable and circular textiles and also the revision of the construction products regulation. Now, both of these areas have a big, high environmental impact, but of course that means that there's the opportunity for low-hanging fruit to be able to really deliver a big change just focusing on those two sectors singularly. So let's have a look now at a short video about the Sustainable Product Initiative. And in this video, Virginijus Sinkevicius, the European Commissioner for the Environment, explains why it is so important to us right now. So let's take a look at the video.
We are living in a difficult period, experiencing a war in Europe. This ruthless and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine by Russia is different to the pandemic and the nature and climate crisis we are facing. Yet there is so much in common. Once again, we are called to rethink the foundation of our economy, of our energy and production systems. Rethink how should we use best the resources we need and the resources we have. More than ever, we need a new approach to the way we design, make and use products. Our new initiative on eco-design aims to set the bar high and make sustainable products the norm. It's a real game changer. Products, our mobile phones, TVs, laptops, textiles should not only be energy efficient, but also made to last. And we should never lose the materials they contain. Those valuable resources should keep on circulating in our economy, making it more resilient to shocks. We can make our products more durable, more reusable, easier to upgrade, repair and refurbish, and we can make them have a lighter footprint on nature and climate change. And this is the way ahead to change how we treat our planet. I look forward to making this change happen together.
Commissioner Sinkevicius there outlining why at this juncture in time it is so important to look at sustainability, and I'm sure another word that will come up today as well is resilience. But we're talking today obviously from the perspective of SMEs, the backbone of the European economy, and we're going to be talking about the opportunities and the challenges, in particularly for those small and medium-sized enterprises. We're asking what will be the main challenges and opportunities. How can standards support the implementation of new proposals? And what are the characteristics that the future digital product passport should have to ensure that it can be implemented by those SMEs? Of course, SMEs typically operate traditionally at a local level, and they're therefore very close to the point of repairing, maintaining and refurbishing products. So they can really play a major role and also provide feedback to those policymakers for any future revisions on the plans and how they work in practice. So one of the things that we're going to hope to see from today's discussion is that this event will actually feed into the SPS position on the Commission proposal. So we really do welcome all your inputs and thoughts on that, and we'll be using a few different tools to engage with you. There is, of course, a hashtag. It's 2022. No event will be complete without one, and it is standards #4 SMEs. So standards for SMEs. Please use that across social media. Get your colleagues involved. Spread the word so that people can keep an eye on what we're discussing. There's also interpretation from English into French, Italian and German if you wish, so that we can get even more people involved. There's also the option to interact with us via Slido. You can go to sli.do or slido.com and just put in the hashtag for this event, standards for SMEs. Or if you're viewing this through the platform, you can also use, there should be a tab to the right of your screen. If there isn't, it's possibly because you've got the video in full screen, so you can reduce that. And you can use that to ask questions of our speakers, to take part in polls, which we'll be having throughout the day, and really just to get involved in this whole discussion. But with that, I'm going to hand over to someone far more knowledgeable than me to give us an introduction and a welcome to today. So please welcome SPS President Gunilla Almgren.
Ladies and gentlemen and SME friends, as President of Small Business Standards, I'm delighted to welcome you to this year's annual event. SMEs getting the standard for sustainable products, drivers and challenges. Today's event is dedicated to the new package of measures put forward by the European Commission in March this year to make sustainable products the norm in the EU. This package of proposals is a key element of the Circular Economy Action Plan and European Green Deal, which have at their heart the ambition to create a fairer and more resource-efficient single market. I'm sure nobody would disagree with this ambition. If the disruptions in the supply chain due to the COVID crisis and the war in Ukraine have shown us anything, it's precisely the need to better use and reuse resources to ensure a resilient and sustainable future. Without any doubt, the new proposals will impact SMEs. If your company produces goods such as textiles, furniture or electronics, you will likely be affected by the new European measures aimed at ensuring the production of more durable, reparable, reusable and recyclable products. New legislation has also been proposed in the area of construction. This will create some challenges for the SMEs operating in these areas, but the new legislation will bring new business opportunities, stimulate innovation too. Requirements on repairability, for example, will expand the repair market, increasing business opportunities for local SMEs. Many SMEs are already leading in the sustainability area and putting forward innovative solutions that ensure we save energy, water and other resources. I see this myself every day as an entrepreneur in the area of sanitary fittings and water savers. And in some countries, such as Finland, SMEs represent more than 70% of clean technology companies. SMEs will ultimately be the ones that will determine the success of the green transformation in Europe. SMEs, representing the overwhelming majority of businesses, are present in virtually every sector of the European economy and are essential to innovation and growth. It's therefore essential that we move them to the center stage in this discussion, and this is why the organization of conferences like the one today are important. As I mentioned, the green transition offers SMEs a great opportunity to innovate and access new markets, but to do so, they need to be able to rely on a stable and well-tailored framework that considers their specificities and does not hamper investments and growth opportunities. Policymakers need to provide the right incentives and support the creation of a market for sustainable products. There is a need to reward green entrepreneurs through price incentives and reduce the green premium on sustainable goods, but also to provide financial and other support for the green upskilling of SMEs. Standards are a crucial element of this framework, and they will be key in the implementation of the proposals but forward by the Commission in the framework of the Sustainable Products Initiative. The EU's ambitions towards a climate-neutral, resilient and circular economy cannot be fulfilled without European standards. Let's look, for example, at the digital product passport, which is one of the new elements introduced in the proposal for a new eco-design regulation. The digital product passport will need to be connected to unique product identifiers, codes similar to or a personal identification number, data carriers or tags, the right to access, introduce and modify information and be interoperable to ensure the information flow throughout the entire value chain. It's clear its implementation will heavily rely on standards. The same goes for other areas, such as construction products or textiles, that will also be discussed in the different panels today. There won't be a green transition without SMEs, and at the same time, we need standards to support this transition. This is why a strong involvement of SMEs in the development of standards is essential. Otherwise, there is a risk that SMEs will have to deal with requirements that pose excessive administrative burdens and that are not feasible practically or economically. This is why small business standards particularly strives to increase the involvement of SMEs in the development of standards and in support of the green transition, both at the European and the international levels. We should not forget that many SMEs are part of international supply chains, and it's important that standards developed at international level reflect the European level of ambition and support the international competitiveness of our SMEs. Today we will look at the impact of the Commission proposals on SMEs and discuss the role of standards and its implementation. What are the challenges and opportunities that the package of initiatives brings to SMEs? What technical requirements are important to ensure that digital product passport is easy to implement and use? What standards do they need to support the implementation of the Commission proposals? How can we ensure that these standards fully consider the needs and specificities of smaller businesses? These are some of the questions we will address today. To answer these questions, the event will take the examples of two product groups that have a significant impact on the environment and have also been targeted by the Commission's initiative, construction and textiles. But I'm sure many of the conclusions may also apply to other product areas. We have gathered speakers from different horizons, policymakers, standard bodies, industry, SMEs, and environmental NGOs. Therefore, I'm positive that the discussions will be dynamic and give us interesting insights. I would also like to express my appreciation to Mrs. Jorna for being with us today and provide some introductory remarks setting the scene for our conference despite her busy schedule. The SBS and its members, Mrs. Jorna's name sounds very familiar indeed. Over the course of her career at the Commission, Mrs. Jorna has been Director responsible for standardization policy. Thank you very much to all for joining us here today. I wish you all a great conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed, Gunilla, and indeed you have set out the stage perfectly for our next speaker. As mentioned, Kerstin Jorna, the Director General at DG GROW in the European Commission, has taken time to record this special message for us. Let's have a look.
Dear Mrs. Almgren and dear SBS community, I'm very happy to be able to address you today with a message about Sustainable Product Initiative, SMEs, and what all of this has to do with standards. The Commission adopted the Ecodesign for Sustainable Products Regulation, in Brussels speak ESPR, on 13 March in the framework of the Circular Economy Package. This initiative is going to be a game changer in Europe because we want sustainable products to be the standard for products in Europe. Also, from a single market standpoint, it's important for us to make sure that there's no fragmentation in the single market. And we really believe that the new opportunities of sustainable production processes and the resulting process will be a great opportunity for companies and consumers alike. This shift in policy will be supported by the digital product passport, which is introduced by the legislation as well, and will provide all the information about a product's environmental sustainability. It will help consumers and businesses to make informed choices when they purchase the products, and it will also facilitate repairs and recycling and improve transparency about a product's life cycle impacts for the environment. And for that, we need to build the right business case. Now, the question is how standards come into this. As for so many of our recent business policy initiatives, we believe that technical implementation of our policies rests best with the standardization community. We do not want to prescribe how a carbon footprint measurement should be done within a product. We want you, the stakeholder community, to lead on this technical work. The digital product passport itself will require standardization work, and we will need to leverage the whole stakeholder networks to help us here. We need to make sure that standards are implementable by SMEs so that SMEs can seize the opportunities stemming from this unprecedented change and are able to secure their place in the value chain. There are services, for example, like repair or refurbishment, which are typically niches for SMEs to thrive in. And they will also have to work with the digital product passports, and they will need standards they can work with. This is why SME presentation in standardization and your role as the standards development will be really crucial. As I said, we know it's challenging. I know that resources are scarce. I know it's a different way of working than compared to what standards development was in the past. But when I look at our global challenges, this type of action has now become a must rather than a can be. We need to use technology, best practices, and cooperation to our advantage and build together that sustainable and resilient future. I wish you all fruitful discussions today, and I'm looking forward to make it happen with you together. Thank you very much.
And indeed, thank you very much to the Director General for that message there today, setting out what the aims of the Commission are and how SMEs can help. But let's now set the scene for our three panels that we have coming up with another short video from SBS.
Well, hello. You just made a great decision visiting me here in my little window on your screen. Yeah, but enough about me. This is about what you do. Maybe you make toys. Or maybe you work in construction. Maybe you make a trendy line in personal protective equipment. Well, whatever it is, you've all got something in common. You're an SME. You may be small, you may be medium, but you are definitely an enterprise. And you make up 99% of all European companies. That's pretty important for the European economy, if you ask me. So, why am I talking to you? Resistance, performance, safety. EN 16931-1:2017. GSM, quality. ISO 9001, interoperability. I'm talking to you about standards. Standards are an important instrument for the European internal market. They contribute to innovation and promote competitiveness across a range of sectors. And that's where Small Business Standards, or SBS, comes in. We're here to represent you, to shape standards in a way most useful to you. Do you get it? Whether we like it or not, standards are everywhere. Transport, trampolines, pyrotechnics, tourism, dentistry, and a whole lot more. Standards help with safety, limiting waste, opening markets, increasing productivity, lowering costs. They can even help with regulatory compliance, although they're not always designed with SMEs in mind, and this can lead to heavy testing and resource management issues, which is why we need you to get involved, so standards can work for you and the 24 million other European SMEs. Get in touch today by visiting sbs-sme.eu.
Well, as been mentioned, we have got 3 panels for you today. One dealing with the construction sector, one dealing with the textile sector. But our first panel today, kicking it off, is going to be about making the digital product passport work for SMEs. We're going to discuss the technical implementation of the product passport, the information it needs to be included, and of course, the sorts of standardisation needed. So stay with us. Well, as I said, our first panel looks at the digital product passport, and I'm delighted to introduce you to our speakers. We have Robin Cornelius, the founder of Product DNA, Michele Galatola, who is the Policy Officer of Energy and Climate at DG GROW in the European Commission, Sander Hoek is the Chief Operating Officer at Magister, and Jérôme Petry is Project Leader in the Ministry of the Economy in Luxembourg. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me today. Robin, I'm going to kickstart with you. So do tell us, from your perspective, what are the challenges that SMEs might face when using the digital product passport? How can SMEs sort of overcome these challenges? It's a very broad question, but I hope it allows you to set out exactly what you're thinking. And then we'll come back and hear from some of the other speakers as well on their position in relation to this topic.
Perspective. The sound is okay?
The sound is okay.
Okay, thank you. In my perspective, the challenges are seems to be complex, but if you take time to explain step by step to the SME leaders and so, it becomes obvious. Actually, to get the point of the European passport, it needs a traceability of a product, meaning gathering all the information, put it on a SAS and so on, and then allow them to communicate in a transparent approach. So the whole process is, I always used to say, it's complicated to explain, but easy to understand. So the main challenges are, first of all, let's say I'm an SME. I'm working in my daily business. I don't have the expertise. I don't have the staff. I don't have the appropriate people. But I always say it's wrong, because even if the big players have a better vision, in a sense, they have more resources to anticipate the new challenges, a big player working department, a lot of departments, and each department is like an SME. So they have the same question as an SME, those guys from the department, how to make it happen. I'm talking about CSR, sourcing, marketing, communication, and depending on the importance, the strategic importance, it could be the CEO and even the board members. So the biggest problem they have, so am I capable? What will it bring? Will my competitor know about my supplier? Do I have a risk of reputation that could appear? This is the biggest problem, challenges we have to explain to SMEs what we've been doing for 15 years now.
Thank you, Rob. And I think you've touched on a lot of points that we will come back to in our discussion. Michele, we have you connected, I'm glad to see. I wonder, can you tell us a little bit more about the Digital Product Passport and how it will contribute to the end aim of making products in the EU market more sustainable?
Yes, thank you, and sorry for the computer connection problem. The idea of the passport is basically to create new business model, but also to provide opportunities to the different stakeholders along the value chain to have access to the information that is relevant to them. We see, for example, a great interest and potential for the DPP in terms of companies having better information about their suppliers in order to better manage their supply chains. We see a lot of advantages for companies using more digital solutions like digital twin to better design their products. We see opportunities for market surveillance authorities and customer authorities to be more effective and efficient in the way they operate. We see opportunities for us as policymakers to have a better understanding of the performances of products when we do legislation that is product-oriented legislation. And of course, last but not least, we see a great opportunity for the players after the product is placed on the market. So basically for recyclers, remanufacturers, and also for citizens as consumers in order to have access to the information that is really relevant to them, to help them making better decisions when buying the products.
Thank you. Sander, let me turn to you. Now, I know your company, it's an online platform for registering buildings and including the materials and products. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about it for those at home who don't know, aren't familiar with it, but also tell us what you see as the challenges and how you think the Digital Product Passport will help make products more sustainable.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. First of all, thank you for the invitation. Of course, happy to be here and share some of our insights with you today. As you already mentioned, Madaster is a company founded about 6 years ago that has a focus on providing all kinds of parties in the construction chain with a solution that enables them to register objects, buildings, real estate. Doesn't really matter if it's infrastructure or products in itself, in a way that we can provide these parties and all other stakeholders with a platform where they can track and trace, compare and calculate all kinds of aspects related to sustainability, like circularity, environmental impact, and, for instance, residual value. To provide you with an answer to your first question, looking at construction, in our experience, digital product passports can play an important role in the sector, becoming more sustainable and circular, because the passport itself, although there is not really a formal national or international standard yet, is already at the root of several directives, laws, and regulations aimed at accelerating the transition. So if you take a look at the Netherlands, for instance, where we started, there are already quite some regulations and initiatives that put the material passport or the product passport at the center of certain calculations that are in some cases even mandatory to do something in construction. So in this respect, the digital product passport, in our opinion, can enable the sector to at least make more informed purchasing decisions, but it can also help the sector to create new value through circular business models and ensure that they are or will be compliant with applicable laws and regulations, which in turn, when I come back to where we have our focus on, will contribute to more sustainable object design, construction, renovation, and deconstruction. If I take a small step towards the producers, one of the things that we noticed there is that, as I mentioned, we basically started as a register for real estate developers. Since I think a year and a half, we noticed that more and more producers are contacting us because they are looking for ways to show and prove that they are developing sustainable products. And this is not only coming from their national motivation, but also as it is increasingly becoming a unique selling point, and is slowly but surely also required by laws and regulations. In this sense, the passport, in our opinion, can play an important role, because if you implement it correctly, it could become a reliable and, verifiable way of making product information transparent and provide all the stakeholders with a framework to at least distribute this data to each other.
Well, you raised an interesting point that I think I'd like to touch on, the fact that we're not all starting from the same point of view in terms of different regions and different countries from around Europe. So that's something to bear in mind. Jérôme, let me turn to you now. You're the convener of the ISO TC 323 Working Group 5, I hope I've got that right, on product circularity data sheet. Tell us what the work you're doing in this group is and how that intersects with the digital product passport, as it may seem in practice in the future.
Yes, hello Jennifer, and yes, you said it right. I'm the convener of the ISO TC 323 Working Group 5, and we are working on the product circularity data sheet. That work started already a little bit more than 1 year ago. And the aim of Working Group 5 is to develop a standard on the methodology to report trustful information related to the circular economy properties of products. So that focus is in fact a subset of critical information as wanted in the Sustainable Product Initiative through the Digital Product Passport. And we on our side, we would like to define unequivocally major circular properties of products and make sure that they are reported in a bottom-up approach throughout the global value chain. And so for doing this, the product circularity data sheet standard is clearly defining terms and definitions used in the different statements. So I'm explaining the statements are questions which have to be replied with true or false. And with that, we automatically are creating a decentralized system of collecting the information. So in fact, we are not asking people to divulge all the information, but that information behind the statement remains really in the hands of the producers without losing or giving price of proprietary information, which is really one of the major showstoppers we identified at the beginning of our work. And we believe that this will enhance the acceptance of such system. So further, the standard details what the supplier also has to do to manage that information and also how to exchange that information on a specific need-to-know base. So if a specific person wants to get more detail what's behind that statement, he identifies himself, and you know exactly with whom you are exchanging that information, and you are more inclined of sharing it. And from what I just explained, the product circularity datasheet is ticking several boxes of the digital product passport as outlined by Michele just before. So that bottom-up approach that everyone in the supply chain is providing information, the way that it generates a decentralized system, and also just to focus on the exchange of information on a need-to-know base. So today, we believe that this system can play an important role in providing relevant information on the circular economy properties of products within a digital product passport. And I think we share a common goal of also unlocking new circular business models.
Well, thank you very much. I think we've seen now all of your different perspectives, but as this is something of a two-way street, I'm going to ask a question of our audience as well. We're going to use the polling tool, Slido. You can go to slido.com, put in that hashtag standards for SMEs, or use the panel to the right on the screen. The question we're asking you is multiple choice. It's, what do you think is the most important challenge that needs to be addressed so that SMEs can benefit from the digital product passport? You've got a few options there: availability of common standards, access to data, financial resources, or knowledge. So please, our audience, do use that tool to give us your answers. We will come back and have a look at your responses in a little while. Note as well, there's also the Q&A tab where you can ask questions of our four great speakers here. But please, if you can, direct it to a specific speaker. Say which one you are speaking to, or if it's to the entire panel, say it's to the whole panel. That gives us a chance to really try and answer your questions. I'm going to come back, Michele, to you to really drill down on this question of standards. Tell us what the Commission's view is on the role of standards in the deployment of the product passport.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, as Kerstin mentioned in her introductory message, we decided to assign a key role to standards for the implementation of the DPP. We have one article, it's the Article 10 of the proposed regulation, where basically we have identified the essential requirements that will then represent the backbone of the standardization mandate we are starting to prepare to develop a family of standards that will touch upon different issues, like, for example, the data exchange formats, the interoperability, which I want to underline is an essential requirement for the passport to become really a success story, the interoperability among different sectors. Other things like, for example, the reliability, the verifiability of the information, all the issues around security, cybersecurity, privacy, the data access rights management, all these things will require standardization work that is essential, because it's important to understand that what the Commission is putting forward is not the passport. There will not be one passport with a label stamp from the Commission. What we are putting forward is a set of common rules, standards and protocols that then any service provider will be able to use to develop maybe tailored passport for certain sectors, but they will all address and use the same language, the same format, the same rules. Again, it's the basis of the interoperability. And this is the work that we need to rely on standards. And it's also important to understand that we are talking also about international standards. Of course, we will issue the standardization mandate to European standardization bodies, but we will ask them very clearly to build on existing standards at international level. Because, supply chains, they don't stop at the border. It's really important that this becomes something that is also acknowledged and hopefully used by other partners in the international arena. So the standardization will be a key element. The other key element will be the timing of what we do. We want to make the passport operational in reasonable time frame. And this is, of course, a challenge for us, and it will be a challenge for the standardization bodies that will have to work to deliver high quality standards in a time frame of that we still need to define, but will be probably quite a challenging one. Thank you.
Michele there mentioned, amongst other things, privacy. So Sander, let me build on that a little bit and ask, how do we keep the amount of data that's included in digital product passports at a reasonable level, at the required level, without over expanding or without leaving gaps where knowledge should be?
So I think one of the most important things that you need to look at in relation to this question is what we experience in the 6 countries that we are currently active in, is that to keep the information to an as low as possible level, we need to start avoiding variations in all the national regulations and work towards one international standard. If I look at the countries where we are talking and where we are working, there are so many standards and requirements and so many deviations from what information should be registered. How do you calculate certain values within these information segments? That if you take a producer, for instance, who is mostly international operating, it is almost impossible to comply with all the demands, wishes, regulations, guidelines that there are. And we are only working in 6 countries. Imagine what would happen if you are a producer and are active in a multitude of this. So I think clearly indicate the ambition and the structure from a regulator. Do not focus on, like was previously mentioned, on the implementation of this structure, but leave that up to the individual service providers. And let the data be managed by the data owners. And in that way, hopefully reduce the amount of required information that the producers need to register to a minimum.
Well, I think that's actually, as you mentioned, Data, a very good point. To go back and maybe take a look at some of the results of our online poll. It's not a scientific poll, but the vast majority of people think that access to data is equally as important as availability of common standards. Knowledge there and financial resources coming in a little bit lower. Let me come back to you, Robin. From your perspective, are there any gaps in priorities? And feel free to build on the results of that poll or on what you've heard your fellow panellists say.
I'm so sorry. What Sandra said at the beginning regarding the passport, the standard of the European product passport is not ready yet, of course. But I would like to insist that the SMEs have to understand it's not a question if they have to be 1D prepared, but when they have or miss the train. It's very important. Also, what Sandra explained, what followed is absolutely correct. And I would like to come back to what Jérôme said. And it's so very true. It's about, as I said, convincing or the brand or could the brand or question coming from the end consumer, convincing the brand to open up and to go to the tier 1 to tier 2 up to the raw materials. Because if you think of the life cycle of a product, we have to think of the global life cycle of life. Phase 1, extract raw materials, transformation, sell and consumption, recycle, and then we go again. This is a life cycle in general. So the point is how to convince all the step owners from the raw material to all the transformation, even if it's sometimes vertically integrated, the platforms, the supply chain, how to convince them to give information, and they lose information. And what Jérôme said is key. It's about API, reverse APIs. Well, the step owner, he's the proprietor of his information, and he can select what he shares by keeping the information for himself. And then we need filters, all the legislation, how to secure, because at the very end, the brand, there are some information they don't want to relieve because of competitiveness, whatever, or risk of reputation because problem happens and so on in any supply chain. So this is key elements we have to remember. Everything, in my opinion, we have been tracing supply chain since 2005. It's a long time ago. The key element is trust. How to bring trust and convince the people to open up. And the trust has to be justified. What are the costs? What are the gains? The pains and the gains. And when you do that exercise, everything comes up naturally.
Jerome, I was going to ask you a little bit about sort of harmonization of standardization anyway, but we've got onto this topic of having the right sort of data, the right amount of data, avoiding overload, but also there very clearly, as Robin said, trust. So I'm wondering to what degree you're looking at things like distributed ledger technology or blockchain as one of the ways of maybe delivering this trust or maybe keeping the data in a manageable way.
Yes, thank you for that specific question. I think at this point we are developing a standard and we try to be neutral on the way of doing that. So of course, blockchain or distributed ledger can be a technical solution of how to implement this. I think we can think of other systems. We just need to make sure that we can clearly, I would say, identify the products. I think the word traceability was already mentioned in some of the previous comments. So it's very important to be able to trace the product within the supply chain and the related information coming with it, and making sure also that that information is well understood and well used in the next product. So a digital product passport, it ideally needs to start at the base material. And I think Robin touched a little bit on all these aspects. And it is very important that we have, I would say, a basic set of information which are applicable to any product. Otherwise, we will have a multitude of very different and very non-interoperable product passports, which will probably make the pain larger than the gain. So really that balancing act between having the relevant information, which are, I would say, similar for all products. And by similar, it can be similar for products, but it can maybe change in the way of how it is assessed at the product level, because depending where you are in the supply chain, you will maybe check for different elements, but still are reflecting on the same property. So there are a lot of aspects we are looking at on how to make sure that information flows correctly throughout the value chain, I would say, irregardless of the technology. But of course, as there's already a wish of decentralization, also a distributed ledger solution could be interesting in order to make it, I would say, a foolproof system. So the information you put on your blockchain will be inalterable, but you need to make sure that that information you put on the blockchain is correct and also well understood.
Well, thankfully, indeed, we are past peak blockchain hype. So it's really about whether it is practicably useful rather than just trying to force a technological solution where there's no problem. So we come back to you, Sander, and ask in a more abstract way, can we find a balance between accessing information and ensuring sensitive information or trade secrets and so on are kept safe?
That's a difficult one to answer. I think in the end there is basically no escape. So if we want to at least achieve a step forward towards circularity and a more sustainable world, we should definitely find one. But again, from our experience, it is still very difficult to convince all parties connected to this whole construction chain to share information with each other. So we have producers providing us with product information. We have architects and developers providing us with building information, and in the platform we try to connect the two. On the one hand, to provide the producer with information where the products are being applied, but also to provide the constructor with detailed product information directly coming from the producer. Both, let's say, sides of this construction are still very hesitant in sharing all the details that preferably should be shared between the two. And I think to at least try and find a common ground, the first thing that should be done is that the regulator or regulators should at least clearly state what type of information should be provided. So they sort of set the ambition. And then in dialogue with the industry, of course, try and reach a common standard that satisfies the information need to both sides or multiple sides, but also ensures a form of protection of the data from a manufacturer standpoint. So that they don't have to share all their details about, for instance, their material-specific mixes for concrete or whatever, a very practical example that we run in basically every day. And then I think leave the implementation of the standard to the industry and their service providers and work from a decentralized model so that the manufacturers at least can maintain optimal control over their data. And then make use of a wide range of already available technologies for, I don't know, storage and security and encryption and whatever chain technology you want to use to maintain and distribute the data in a structured manner.
Michele, let me come back to you and as we are today, of course, talking about SMEs, ask whether there's any particular support foreseen for SMEs in terms of applying and using the proposals.
Yes, thank you. I will reply to your question, and then if I have time, I also want to reflect on a few of the things that the other panelists have been saying, which I find very interesting. So the question on SME, there is one specific article in the proposed regulation that is explicitly listing typologies of incentives that the Commission and Member States will made available to SMEs. I think there is an important distinction to be made if we talk about the passport in the context of the Ecodesign regulation, because the obligation of creating the passport will be for the economic operator placing the product on the market. So that for them, they will have the technical challenges of creating the passport and populating the passport. This may mean that not all SMEs will have this challenge if they are active along the supply chain, but they don't place the product on the market. So we need to distinguish when we talk about the passport, what are the challenges for the economic operator placing the product, and what are the challenges for the SME who will have to provide the information required to the economic operator placing the product on the market. If we don't make this distinction, we run the risk of creating some misinformation to the SMEs. So in terms of support, we are considering to provide the financial support in terms of capacity buildings, in terms of access to technologies and other things that we already are doing for SME in the context of other legislation, and we want to strengthen these. As you know, most of these incentives depends on member states, not so much that on the Commission, but of course we will play the role that we can. Now, if I can spend 1 minute to give some feedback on certain issues that I heard, the issue of confidentiality, it's a key issue. Of course, I come from DG Grow. For us, it's a very important one. We think that by managing access rights in different ways for different stakeholders, that is one contribution to avoid that there is a leakage of information where you don't want to have the leakage information, so that only if you have the right to see certain information, you will be able to see. So competitors in principle should not. The second thing is that informations need to be also of a quantitative nature to achieve the political objectives that we have. So it will be important to have the qualitative information when needed, but also we will rely on quantitative information. And the last thing is that, we have to look at the reality of things. What Jerome and Sander and Robin were describing as the ideal passport, a passport that starts from the raw materials and then you, in a modular fashion, you add information along the supply chain. That is the ideal passport. From the legislative point of view, we in Europe cannot implement that ideal, because basically we cannot implement a requirement on an economic actor that doesn't have a direct commercial link with us. So if you have a miner who is extracting a raw material in a certain part of the world, and that raw material is sold to a second player on the market that then sell that to a third player on the market, we cannot directly impose any requirement on the miner. So this ideal of having a passport built in a modular way can happen through voluntary initiatives, can happen through industry-driven initiatives, but you cannot find that in a legislation adopted at European level. I hope that clarifies a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela. I know this is a discussion for another day about ethical supply chains and knowing your roots, but I thank you for the clarification. Looking online, we have a lot of questions coming in from our audience, so I hope, panelists, you're ready to perhaps tackle a few of these. Our first question is quite a broad one. How can we make sure that the longer lifetime and the sustainability of products from European SMEs is promoted and taken into account compared to low-priced products? So I guess it's taking into account the whole sustainability factor, including the price. I don't know, perhaps, Robin, would you like to tackle your thoughts on that?
The question of the price of the product or in the life cycle and how long you keep it, you buy and you throw away, is not the real point. The only solution is to consume less. But it has to be said in a different way. But, and to explain, to motivate, I come back to motivation, but that the consumer, he should participate in the life cycle of a product. Any product, when that product parcel will appear, at least in the software we're using, you can click, you can put, I bought this product at that place, and the company says, if you want to give it back to be recycled, you can give it at those following addresses, depending on the IP of your computer. They can find out where you are and tell you in this village, on this town you can go, and all the process. So it's again about education. I mean, my three kids are around 30s, late 20s and early 30s. For them, it's unthinkable to buy a new product if they don't need it. Secondly, and they try to buy secondhand, and so they are not exceptions. So it's about motivation. It's about, we just said before, what Michel said, for the EU, we cannot force a third party, the miner, who sells to next in extraction. I know, but forcing is one way. It's pushing. Just pull the motivation. For the blockchain, it's complicated for small guys in different steps. But you have to give tutorial explaining that will be part of the chain, that will exist. You don't have small businesses uninteresting for the friends, like I'm a dyer, or I have a brand and everybody is interested in what I'm doing. Everybody's equal. It's about their life, their motivation. So the end consumer is not the consumer. He's a fellow colleague of any brand, if I take the example of the brand, who wants to participate. I bought that pen and I will give it there and I know it will be recycled. It's about motivation. And I don't know how to say. We have been creating 150 million items in 15 years. Now we do deeply in construction and textile and cosmetics. But just one thing, remember in the early 30s, 20s, it was Australian who came with the first traceability for the Medicare. Then it came for food in the 50s. And now it's for the last 50 years, 70 years, a car needs a number plate to circulate. Same like a car needs a number plate, a product needs an ID to be identified, like an ID or COVID ID, like you mentioned before, by the way. So it's only how we have to sit all together, and I'm very grateful to be invited to listen to my colleague says. It's just simplify. And if there is one point, and I can swear, you can ask all the consumer, you can make a sondage, I don't know how you say. When I started 40 years back in that topic of CSR, it was in Rio 92, you can imagine. It was about life, child labor, and so on. and now chemicals in the industry, okay. But the point is the green gas emission. And if we can come with 2-3 motivating keys, like points like key green gas. What is the production of this product in green gas? Is it locally produced? How many kilometers? Green gas is, if green gas is not under control, you can forget all the rest. So we have to sit together and all the governments and so we're working with some commissions. They have the project with Netherlands, Holland, Netherlands, Luxembourg, and it's included, of course, Germany and France. Switzerland, we are out of everything, even if I'm Swedish. But how to get a common European passport. So they have to be proud to say, I bought a product, I have the passport of it. It's about motivating people. Maybe I'm too old. I'm too old to dream. No, I believe in it. Strongly believe in it. And we as private actors should support government, take position, dedicate time for those commissions to help them, to help them to spread their word. It's a tiny a thin thread between government and private sector. It has to change now. It has to change. Unless people will continue to buy very cheap garment. How can you pay it? I was in garment t-shirts for garment industry for 40 years. Why can you buy a t-shirt for €2 and somebody sometimes you can buy, and for €79 or €100? It's the perception of the product. But what's interesting is not the price. Also, the budget is there. It's about how it's produced, made by whom, not made in this country, made by. You can put a face, you can question the people. Made by is number one. If we can reach only tier 1, it's a start. And when you have the made by, how, why, if you place the question, why are you producing this product? Oh, you have to ask my stylist, you have to ask no, why? It's a simple question. I do believe in human-centric vision. Also, we need digital-centric solutions. That's I'm not a priest, so I don't know what else to say, and I took a lot of time, like usual. Sorry, that's it.
No problem, Robin. Nothing wrong with a bit of idealism. Looking at another question, Sander, one specifically for you, asking what should be contained in a DPP for construction. Also, what is the state of the art of the Madaster product?
First question: what should be in the passport? Ideally, specifically for the construction sector, it should contain information about material composition. It should contain information about environmental impact. And it should contain information about something that is generally referred to as detachability. That would be the ideal situation. If I take a look at what we are currently doing for the producers and their digital registration in Madaster, we basically only require them to provide the product with a name and preferably with some form of tracing, either it being their own product code or preferably being a GS1 generated AON or currently called cheating code. All the other information, so full EPD, full material composition, input, output flows of materials, etc., it's all optional. And why is it optional? Because we do not want to impose all kinds of mandatory stuff in our platform yet. We leave it up to the producer to provide us with the information that they want to share or that they can share, because we also need to recognize that a lot of producers, although they are probably all willing to provide transparency, simply cannot yet because they don't have the information, because they don't have LCAs, because they don't have EPDs, for all very legitimate reasons. There is a large gap still between what we would like to see in the passport and what is currently required in the passport or even possible to register.
Well, Michele, I think Sanders even identified some of the answers you will probably give to our next question from Alex, a member of the audience, asking why the Commission opted for the need-to-know principle. If information requirements have been set, should the default position not be transparency? Michele, if you can, briefly give some response to that, please.
Yeah, I think I already mentioned the key line. The point is that transparency is important, but full transparency is not necessarily what we need to support good business. So there is a limit that is the confidentiality, the intellectual property on which a lot of companies have been created and around which they have created the business. That it needs to be protected. I think we have to be very ambitious in our objectives, but also very pragmatic in how we want to achieve them. The ambition, the policy objective is to make sustainable product the norm in Europe. So this is at the core of the Circular Economy Action Plan. It's one of the key messages that President von der Leyen has been repeating over and over. That is the objective. And there are different ways of achieving those objectives. We think that the set of rules that we've been putting forward and the other legislation that we are preparing are all aimed at achieving those objectives. We don't believe, and when I say we, I just don't mean the DG Grow, but the whole service, the entire Commission services, we don't believe that full transparency will necessarily allow us to better achieve those objectives. For us, what is important is not necessarily the full transparency, but is something else that Jérôme was hinting to, that is the reliability of the data that is provided. Because we could have fully transparent data, but if those data are not correct or not reliable, the motto garbage in, garbage out, then there's nothing that we do with crap data, even if they are transparent. So we rather focus more on the reliability of the data and to give those data to who need the data. And that is why not everything be included in the passport, but only the information that is relevant for the passport to be included. So what does a recycler need to know about a battery in order to allow its recycling? That is the kind of information that we will discuss with the stakeholders, with the industries and with member states, and only that relevant information will be included in the passport. But that is not the information that another battery developer needs to have access to. That will be full transparency. We don't think that's the way forward. We think that it's the recycler and the member states market surveillance authorities that need to know what is the chemical composition of that component of the battery. Full stop, not everybody else.
Well, thank you. And I think maybe our next question on adaptability can go to you, Jérôme. Helmut Heybach is asking, for remanufacturing and refurbishing of products, SMEs are very much affected, but it is very difficult when you're talking about these refurbished products. How can a digital passport be adapted? Is there some flexibility there? What would you see as ways of maybe different taxonomy or different methods of adjusting things when we're talking about refurbished products?
I think when I reflect on what we do in our group is that we are trying to set up a clear language on the statements we are asking to maybe enable refurbishment or remanufacturing of products. And these people who are in that business need to have specific information. And that is, I think, also what Michele wanted to say is they don't need to have a full, transparent, detailed list of information, but just what is necessary for their business. And when the product is, I would say, refurbished or remanufactured, of course, they are putting it back on the market and will also have that obligation to put it back on the market with a digital product passport. So they need also to make sure that the information present in the first life cycle remains present or updated if necessary in the second life cycle. So we hope that the standardization will enable all this. It should not stop as it used to be before, that when the first life is done, that you have no information and the product becomes a waste. But here we really want the products to keep on a second life, maintain their value, and by having the necessary information attached to the product with that digital product passport in a way or another way.
Thank you. Well, Michele, probably no surprise, as a Commission representative on the panel, we have a couple of very specific questions for you. If I group them, maybe you can tackle a couple for our audience. One person is asking about critical raw materials. Will the digital product passport include information on this? Also asking about ethical supply chains. What about products that are sourced in Europe? For example, would a modular DPP be foreseen here? And also, could companies that are outside of the scope of the sectors concerned, constructions, textiles, etc., set up a digital passport? If you could tackle any of those, I know it's quite a lot to throw on your plate at once.
Yeah, I will try to be very short and tackle all of them. Let's start from the last one. Yes, companies will be able to develop passports that are in compliance with the essential requirements that the regulation put forward in Article 10 on a voluntary basis. That is not forbidden. For the products that will be regulated through Ecodesign, then there will be the passport will be required to be produced by legislation. So the legislation will define the content of the passport, the access rights, and everything else. But of course, nothing prevents sectors to develop their own passport in case we don't regulate them. The second, now I forgot the other three questions. One question was about will raw materials be included? So let me clarify that raw materials as such, they are not in scope of the Ecodesign draft proposed regulation. That means we will not, through the Ecodesign, we will not regulate the production of raw material. That does not mean that information on raw material will not be included in the passport. If when preparing the delegated, so the secondary legislation for a certain product group, through the life cycle assessment, through the hotspot analysis, through the consultation, we will identify that information on raw material is essential to achieve some of the policy objectives, then we may decide to have information on the critical raw materials in the passport. But it's a case-by-case discussion for every single product group. That means the two passports for two different products, two different sectors, will not necessarily automatically include the same information. The system behind will be the same, the protocols will be the same, but the information itself will be product-specific, product group-specific. Now, concerning the ethical information, it's the passport that has been introduced through the Ecodesign will not include information on social issues because social sustainability is not in scope of the Ecodesign legislation, because there are other legislation recently adopted by the Commission that look into the social component of sustainability. If other legislation want to use the same architecture that we will be developing for the passport, that will be possible. I think that it is what will happen progressively with time. Other legislation will use the same system. So in terms of IT architecture, it will remain the same. In terms of the specific content may be regulated differently depending on the legislation itself.
Well, thank you. I do want to bring Robin and Sander back in here to build a little bit on the question of whether other sorts of sectors that are outside the scope may develop or decide voluntarily to develop a digital product passport. And I want to know, do you think there are lessons from the textile and the construction sector that may be transferable to other particular SMEs, small businesses, that you might say, take this as a template or this is a best practice? Robin, do you have any ideas in that regard about what might be a way of communicating this sort of best practice?
We have to be generic, standard, granularity is complexity, is problems. We have to keep it focused, like Michele just said. In any sector, you have the same extraction, transformation, sell, distribution, consumption, and recycling. So we started historically with textile. I was very active in textile. And then now we have a huge, a lot of NDAs, as you can imagine. Maybe the biggest ones in the construction sector. We work with big project for construction. Some are official, like the Olympic buildings in Paris 2024. They want to know the origin of the wood, of the steel, of etc., etc. So construction is there. Textile is obviously there. Cosmetics, we're very much involved in cosmetic sector for years now. And again, it's completely a bit different because you have thousands of ingredients. And to come back to Michele said, they show 90% of the ingredient, but they don't show the mixture, the percentage of the ingredient. They keep this secret. We work with food, a lot of in food sector. We work in, there are so many, I will let Jérôme, he must be very much more aware than me, but we have about 9 sectors we work in, 9 sectors. Construction, I will not name them, we don't have time, but it's replicable for all the sector. All the sector should have the same methodology. We have blockchain SIGPA for years. Also, I'm sure Jérôme will agree, blockchain is very popular. It's a good argument, but you can work it out from the blockchain. We chose the blockchain. Also, it's complicated because you have to explain to the guys in the construction whatever how to use the blockchain and what he has to give for information, how with API, how we can give. So everything is complicated, but it's just a way of like breathing. We are breathing every day. We should behave on a natural way. And this is important. I will let Jérôme to come. In my opinion, it's any sector is concerned because we have human guys fighting, building, proud of what they're doing. We have to help them to maintain their ego high. There is no, we said in French, il n'y a pas de saut métier. There is no business less interesting than the other. Let's put the human in the center and trust the human and come with procedure. So for me, all sector will need it. Jérôme, I don't know what you think.
Well, Jérôme, did you want to jump in there? And I'm going to ask also, I'd like to very much hear as well from Sander what the platform he's working on.
Oh, Sander, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm so sorry.
Sander.
No worries, Jérôme can answer first as well. No problem.
I can maybe say one short word. I think we are talking a lot about the sectors, and of course, every sector will be important in my belief, and that's why we are looking in our work to include all the sectors and really try to distill the statements to statements which are applicable to every sector. So, of course, we have specific sectors which are more predominant based on their size or maybe their historical importance also in Europe. So we have a lot of influence from construction. Automotive is also very important in Europe. Textile has been named because there's all this fast fashion going on. So we know that this is also a part creating a lot of waste. But any other sector must be integrated. So, and by touching on that, I wanted also to say that we need to see this as a global issue. And that's also why when we addressed ISO on this, we addressed it directly at ISO level, because we believe that we must be inclusive with all the countries around the world, and also specifically in the countries where we are producing today. I think when we speak about Europe, a lot of products are no longer produced in Europe, so we are more, I would say, a mature consumer market. And in order to tackle all the problems we see today of products coming on the market where it says, okay, it's compliant to this or this or this regulation, but in fact it's not, really need to take within that standardization framework the countries which are the powerhouses of production today. And also I want hereby also to thank my co-convener, which is Mr. Ding Shuang, representing the Chinese Institute of Standardization. So we are working really on a global level in producing that standard.
Thank you very much indeed, Jérôme. And I think perhaps we will hear, Sander, what are your thoughts as well?
Basically, not much to add. I think I fully agree. I think we need to find a way to come up with an overarching principle internationally, globally, for all sectors, where there is like a standard that everybody can work with, but it will also allow for enough room for the specifics to deviate from this standard, or at least add to the standard, so that you get the information within the specific sector that is relevant for the sector, but you also have sort of like a common ground where you can at least combine and compare certain sets of informations over the sectors.
Well, I think it's a good juncture. We have just 5 minutes to go, and I'm going to ask a very broad wrap-up question to you each in just a moment. But first of all, I want to come back to that poll question that we asked right at the beginning of our panel, that people have been voting on. We asked what people thought was the most important challenge so that SMEs can benefit from the digital product passport, and it seems now the vast number of people think it's availability of common standards. Probably not a surprise to you, given the nature of the conversation we've had. Secondly, we've had access to data and knowledge. And then lastly, a small percentage, only 14%, thought financial resources, which is a refreshing change from how things normally go. Normally everyone says we just need more money to throw at the problem, but certainly not the case here. So Alex again has asked a very good sort of general question that I want to hear from each of you as a short wrap up, which is, can Europe still lead the race in setting standards for something like the digital product passport? Are there other standards out there? Is there international competition? Where does Europe fit in the global ecosystem with regard to this? I think, Jérôme, let me start with you, and then I will go around and hear from each of you in turn.
I think I would say yes, positively, that Europe is still setting a lot of standard and being the first of implementing this kind of actions. When I look at the comments I have in my international group is, yes, we need to follow what Europe is making. We need to make sure that we are aligned with what is happening there. Of course, we are trying to align with all the other initiatives going on worldwide. But I see a kind of leadership coming from what's being done at Commission level, and see other countries, specifically North America, then following up on what's happening. Also, I remember in my previous job, several years ago when ROHS came in, then suddenly you had ROHS Chinese version. So we see that Europe has still a leadership and is being followed by all the major countries out there.
Thank you. Michele, your thoughts on whether Europe can be leading? I'm sure I can guess what you will say.
I agree 100% with what Jérôme just said. We are playing a leading role in the standardization community worldwide that is recognized. And for the specific case of the passport, we probably are in a better position in the sense that there are already a number of standards that already exist. I mean, when I was making the list of what we need, we don't need to develop everything from scratch. A lot of things are already there. We just need to be sure and adapt them to be sure that they are fit for purpose. And many of these standards are international standards, because the passport is nothing new to industry. I mean, companies have been doing similar things for a lot of years, and Sander and Robin have confirmed that in their speeches. So yes, we will lead because we have the political vision to that, but we will do that in Europe, but in close collaboration with our international partners.
Thank you. Sander, your final thoughts and on where we are in the world?
Yeah, so I don't want to sound boring, but I can only confirm what has already been said. So we are active in Europe, but do also have projects running outside of Europe, and basically cross the line. All the companies, parties and governments that we talk to are all looking at Europe because they still feel that they are fulfilling a leading role in this subject and are just steps ahead, and people want to know what is happening here and try and implement a same process or structure.
And last but not least, Robin, a very brief wrap up from you.
I swear. I swear. I wish we had Jean Monnet here. He could answer for us. He was my mentor when I studied political science 50 years back. But a thought for Jean Monnet. There are 3 reasons we have, of course, yes, for my colleagues. 3 reasons First of all, we have the best of. We have fantastic political institution, democracy, and so transparent. Secondly, we have the highest range of patents and creativity innovation. If you take all the European countries, we have the highest living standard worldwide per capita. You take the GDP and so we can afford to do it. Mitterrand, somebody said, you have to afford to be socialist. So no politics, I know. So we have money, we have the creation, we have the culture, and maybe it's so stupid. When Europe came up with the European passport, with the euro, no passport. Everything is circulating, except Switzerland, maybe, okay. But so you see, so it can't be a better place to find the future leadership of this project. It must be. It is already Europe. It is already. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Robin. That's an optimistic point to end on. Thank you very much, gentlemen. That's been a great conversation to set out our stall for the first of our three panels today. Thank you, of course, to our audience questions. Do keep them coming, because our next two panels will focus on those two very specific sectors, textiles and construction. So we want to hear your thoughts. And in fact, our next panel will be on the construction products regulation that's aiming to create a new common technical language to assess construction products. That's coming up next. Stay with us. Welcome back, and we are into one of our first sectorally specific panels now. This is the new CPR, the Construction Products Regulation, and we're asking about how we get towards more sustainability in construction. So I've got some great panelists with you. I'm delighted to say joining me in the studio in person is Hein Bollens, Deputy Head of Unit for the Green and Digital Twin Transition on Constructions and Standards within DG GROW in the European Commission.
Nice to
Thank you very much that you're joining us. We know also online we also have Dr. Christine Lemaitre, Chief Executive Officer at the German Sustainable Building Council. Thank you very much, Christine. Philip van Nieuwenhuizen is President of the European Builders Federation, and Alexandra Beltrao is the Product Standards Manager for Tata Steel and Chair of the SEN Working Group Strategy for the Construction Sector. Thank you all very much for joining us. I am very pleased that we're going to go into another detailed discussion on what we think can happen within this very specific sector. So I think, Heinz, let me start off, Hein, with you. The revision of the CPR was presented as part of this overall package aimed at delivering and supporting the Circular Economy Action Plan. So which sustainability elements in specific are revised within the CPR? What should we be looking out for? What are the interactions with the other regulations in terms of eco-design? Give us a broad overview on what we can expect.
Thank you so much for that question, and happy to be here today also with the participants. Indeed, it has been quite of an important milestone that we have reached so far. What we have been trying to do with the new proposal of CPR is, of course, not only addressing and looking at the environmental and climate goals that we have set earlier in the Green Deal, we have also been looking at trying to repair issues in the CPR which have been not going so well in the past, and there are different reasons why we have revised the construction product regulation. But also one important element for the revision was in fact the inclusion of the sustainability aspects that now also have been covered by the ESPR, the Ecodesign Sustainable Product Regulation, which you discussed before. The idea is that the ESPR would be the horizontal layer, and whereby the CPR would be the, let's say, the vertical part of it. And we would, of course, align to what is in the horizontal piece of legislation, which is the ESPR, with some specificities for the CPR regulations as such.
Well, I think that's a good place to start. I'm going to turn now to Christine. You're working for DGNB, Europe's biggest network for sustainable building. From your perspective, what is the impact of the CPR revision likely to be on the application of circularity principles in construction?
Well, I think we have to see what really the impacts are, but what we hope will happen that we see more sustainable products, more products which will be designed to be circular. And I think especially, and I can just maybe as well come from the view of the users, basically the architects and designers. And for them, it is very, very important to get more security on the quality of the products, to make sure that they don't have to go through the hoops and do all the research around what a good product is or what a good product is not. So I'm really hoping that we will see a higher level of quality, more transparency for products, which make it easier to use in the design processes, in the renovation processes, to make it easier for the clients, for the architects, to make their choice and to have the security that they have selected high quality products, which as well are in the end, not waste, but ideally can be used and can go back into the cycle and can be recycled, can be reused.
Thank you, Christine. Philip van Nieuwenhuizen, let me ask you, what are the big implications for SMEs? That's the focus of our discussion today. Can you drill down into that for us?
Yes, thank you. In fact, the answer is very well summarized in the introduction of the program, but I will nevertheless elaborate on it. Our members, in collaboration with the construction experts of SBS, have been extremely active on the dossier to defend and promote the interests of construction SMEs and crafts. You should consider that 99.6% of the companies working in construction are SMEs, and the vast majority of them are craftsmen and micro enterprises. So there is a particular interest amongst our members to be active on this file. And we have been very active, therefore, in the political and technical exchanges on the CPR revision, even collaborating with FIAC and the Construction Products Europe Association on industry-oriented revision approach. Our SMEs were very anxious to finally receive the review proposal of the CPR to establish a much needed stable regulatory framework which can enable the sector to contribute to the efforts towards green and digital transition. SMEs support the development of the CPR as a single piece of EU legislation regulating construction products, and we need it to be clear and coherent. We welcome the promotion of sustainability through the CPR, and we are very motivated to contribute to the efforts needed to make construction more sustainable. However, the implications of changing to a circular economy model will be more difficult for SMEs to cope with in terms of administrative burdens and technical requirements due to their limited financial and human resources. More specifically, the extension of the scope of the CPR and the needed coherence with other pieces of European legislation, such as the Ecodesign Directive or the Waste Directive, will require time to be understood, absorbed, and implemented by the SME ecosystem. This is especially important since big, medium, and small companies in construction often have complementary roles, and thus they constitute a value chain. Let me remind you that chains are only as strong as the weakest link, so it is of the utmost importance that standards and regulation are developed to be operable by small companies and craftsmen also. So think small first. Another specific challenge for the new CPR lies in the confusing simplification procedures for micro and small enterprises. These procedures need to be pragmatically designed and comprehensive to be broadly implemented. The conditions to use the simplification procedures should be consistent and refrain from costly assessments. Moreover, a reinforced role of harmonized standards is crucial for SMEs as they need up-to-date standards to maintain their competitiveness and their growth potential by ensuring that their products comply with EU legislation. The exchange of information facilitated by digitalization is a major opportunity for innovation, improved communication and better efficiency. However, there are only a few glimpses of digitalization in the revision of the CPR, which could lead to a need for another revision in the medium term. And this is a concern for us too, because we want it to be future-proof from the beginning. Finally, incentives to attract qualified workers in construction are a major challenge of our sector, big, medium, small, or micro. This leads to an important need of funding dedicated to re-education. Reskilling and upskilling of construction SMEs is essential for the achievement of the twin transition. However, pieces of legislation as the CPR do not improve the attractiveness of the sector given their complexity, so we plead for less complexity. That is my first answer, my first reaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. I'm sure we're going to touch on many of those elements again, including, of course, energy performance and eco-design. Let me turn, Alexandra, to you. Give me your perspective, but with a focus, for example, on standards, because we are talking about standards today. I think you might be on mute. Let's try again. Can we hear Alexandra? We cannot. Oh dear. Well, not to worry, Alexandra, try a few different tricks there and we'll see if we can get you back. In the meantime, as we did in our previous panel, we are going to launch a poll on Slido for the audience because we want you to answer the questions as well. We want to take the temperature of who's watching. We do have a poll here. It's a multiple choice, as in the last round. What is the most important barrier to sustainable construction? Is it higher prices? Is it barriers for the reuse and recycling of materials? Is it low demand, lack of expertise or knowledge? Or is it a lack of common standards? And we will have a look at what the results you have there for us in the next few minutes. We'll keep an eye on that throughout the point of our discussion. Remember, you can also join that by going directly to Slido on your browser, that's slido.com or sli.do, and put in the hashtag for this event, that is standards number 4 SMEs. And remember, we also want your questions to our panellists. Let's try again. Let's see, Alexandra, I believe we still can't hear you. Let's give it one more try. Can we hear you? Alexander, no, we're shaking heads. Unfortunately, Alexander, we're going to try and get back to you through another method. But in the meantime, let me actually turn to you, Hein, and build on the point that I think that Philip was making, which is how does this revision fit with those other bits of regulation? We mentioned eco-design, we mentioned the energy performance of buildings. How can there be enough clarity and enough coherence between them, particularly when we think about SMEs who maybe don't have the resources of larger enterprises?
Indeed, and I very welcome the points that have been made earlier. These are also things that we have heard and learned throughout the consultation process. It's the coherence of EU policies. And this is one of the criteria that we, of course, look at into the refit exercises that we have to do. Refit is when we look at the efficiency and effectiveness of EU legislations. And of course, they all try to fit nicely together. I give an example, for example, for the renovation wave. For the renovation wave, we have about 300 billion euros that we have to invest to make sure that half of the buildings are renovated within the next 10 years, which is a quite high challenge. Another element which is a quite crucial one is that we very often look first to the SMEs. And what the situation for the SMEs and the impact that it will have. I'm sitting here as a colleague, a representative of DG Grow, looking at SMEs and the industry angle at European level. And I can assure you that we always look and we work with our colleagues to see whether there is not a disadvantage angle for the SMEs when we produce and we propose a new piece of legislation trying to address those crucial elements. So in principle, they always hang nicely together. I must say, though, that today we have just put the proposal on the table of the Council and the European Parliament. It was a proposal which has been adopted by the College, and of course it's now up to the co-legislators, the European Parliament and the Council, to have a final say and to come to compromise on the proposal that has been made by the Commission. And also they have in their minds the coherence of EU policies when it comes to the different policies that have been pursued by the Commission. Of course, within the overriding context of the European Green Deal, or the Fit for 55, and of course the climate and environment discussions and the goals that we have set.
Thank you very much. Christine, let me turn to you. I'm going to ask you the same question that we asked our audience, which is, what do you see as the main barriers to sustainable construction? I'd really like to get your thoughts before we see what the audience actually said.
Well, I think there are several barriers. I think one of maybe the biggest barrier we're having is the lack of knowledge in the whole value chain, that there are different understandings of what sustainability might be or might not be. We have a lot of, say, rumors that sustainable construction is always more expensive. This is something, you know, when I introduce myself, the person I talk to is then the first reaction is like, oh, sustainability, oh, this is more expensive. And I find that a bit strange. And I always answer, it's crazy how you could do that with a building you don't even know, at a location you don't even know, and basically go through all the way to the tender in order to make these kind of claims. So I think we're having a lot of rumors out there, and I think this is as well a big barrier. And I think the other thing is really accessibility to data and to information, to transparency, in a way that what I said earlier, you know, in the design and the construction process, the most important resource, and we never talk about that, is time. People never have time to do the research and to understand what is all out there. So they have to make a quick decision in a very short amount of time, and then they need a certain kind of security. So I think this transparency and to be able to trust and to rely on regulation and to understand what does it mean, what kind of product quality can I really rely on, I think this is one of the barriers we're facing. So it's a multi problem, let's say, on barriers.
Well, thank you. Philip, the same question to you. I'm keen to know what people see as the big barriers to this possibility of sustainable construction. I mean, why are we seeing difficulties? Why do we even need all of these new policy proposals? Do you see a particular trend?
In fact, what Christine said, it's complexity of regulation, and that is a barrier, and we would have preferred to have a more holistic approach, meaning, for instance, that there would be a digitalized system on which you can base all the other aspects of the construction. So, for instance, if you want a small company to comply to certain standards, for him it should be very easy to put just a small sign on his tablet while he is doing his constructing, so that he can afterwards just make a printout or a hard copy on his computer that he complied with all the different aspects that are in this regulatory framework for sustainable construction. Because if you don't facilitate it and you make it an administrative burden, he will turn more to his daily bread, where he earns his money, working hard and not having enough time to register, in fact, the simple requirements that he should comply to.
Well, Hein, I'm going to ask you to react to that. I'm sure it's not the first time you've heard about people being concerned about regulatory burden and compliance, which is fine if you're a big organisation, but SMEs, they do feel it.
Yes. Let me immediately jump into this particular point, and then I would like to come back to, in fact, what was said earlier with regard to the skills and the incentives given and the difficulties to understand what sustainability actually means. For example, with regard to better understanding pieces of legislation, the regulatory framework for construction product regulation. For example, yesterday we have organized a first Q&A session with stakeholders, with more than 500 participants, where we have gone through all the different questions that we have received from NGOs, from stakeholders and industry, those particular questions that they have had on the proposal for the construction product regulation. It was a successful Q&A session, which took the entire morning, a little bit longer. We will try now to cluster those questions and answers, also to bring that to the public at a certain point in time. That there is a broad knowledge and better understanding about what we have put on the table and what the Council and the Parliament are discussing. A point that was made earlier with regard to the skills and reskilling and upskilling, it's rather upskilling of the workforce and the incentives. I would like to mention here that recently in the month of February, we have agreed with industry and stakeholders on a pact for skills for construction. And the pact for skills has been supported by the biggest associations and industries and NGOs out there for construction to make sure that we have a pathway to indeed upskill the workforce into that new green and digital transition. And on the last point, and I would like to build on that pathway and that twin transition, is about the understanding what sustainability means, what green means, what digital means. And to make that a little bit more understandable, at the end of last year, we have issued in the Commission a transition pathway for construction. This was done together with the High-Level Construction Forum, which is our unique interlocutor with a broad base of industry and stakeholders. And the transition pathway is looking at three elements. It's looking at resilience of the sector, the green and the digital. We are working again and discussing with the sector the different outcomes that we might see by the end of this year. But the transition pathway, as we produced it by the end of last year, is part of the industrial strategy at European level, where the construction sector was appointed as one of the priority ones of the 14 ecosystems that we know. And our commissioner has put construction as one of the priority sectors to address, given the difficulties and challenges that it is meeting today in the current economic situation.
Well, you did mention the current economic situation. Of course, we see ourselves coming out of sort of perma-crises now, and supply chains and resilience are the two big key words. Can we, let's see one more time, maybe if we have got Alexandra. Have we sorted out the sound gremlins, Alexandra?
Can you hear me?
We can, fantastic. Well done.
Great.
In that case, I'm going to give you the unenviable challenge of reacting to everything you've heard so far in a sort of a concise way, and to lead on into your perspective.
Yeah, if I may, I would like to go back to the role of standards, and to highlight three important aspects. I'm sure there are more. The first one is that standards provide the harmonized technical language on sustainability, and this is really important to have a good communication between all the stakeholders involved in the CPR framework, which is really complex and has lots of stakeholders involved, the manufacturers, other economic operators. Is even more relevant with the possibility of having used products placed on the market. So we also have the end users, the Commission, member states, and so on. So I think this is a really important role for standards. The second one is, I would like to steal something that was said in the previous panel by Robin. It's about motivation. So, and I think that standards allow the industry buy-in. So I think because industry is involved in the development of standards, and because they are responsible for the introduction of circularity aspects in standards, they think that they more easily will abide to these aspects they themselves put in the standards. And I think that this is important if we think about the new draft of the CPR that foresees a parallel route where we have a delegated act instead of standards in exceptional conditions. But I think that we will lose this that is given by standards, that is the industry buy-in. And lastly, because we are talking about SMEs, I know that some SMEs are not always involved directly in standardization. I think we'll talk about that later. But they always use standards, and standards are part of their processes, are part of their activities. So by using these circularity aspects in standards, we are promoting sustainability, because these standards will be used by companies, they'll be translated into the national standards throughout Europe. So this is a way of promoting circularity and sustainability.
Thank you, Alexandra. I know that was a tough job to try and sum it all up in one go. Let's have a look now at the results of our Slido poll, the poll that you've been able to carry out there. What is the biggest barrier to sustainable construction? Well, it seems that more than half of you think it is barriers for the reuse and recycling of the materials themselves. Nearly 30% think it's a lack of expertise or knowledge. 19% think it's higher prices, and 0 think it's about low demand. So it's really a practical, hands-on problem, I think, that we're seeing there reflected in that. Let me come back, Philip, to you. Are you surprised by the results of that poll, or what is the reaction that people see that it's the lack of ability to reuse and recycle materials is one of the biggest barriers?
Well, I'm not all that surprised. I think prices, if you scale up in the long term, will be lower, and I think also that the general consensus about overusing the natural resources is growing and growing, so people are willing to pay a little more. And as I said in my former reaction, in fact, that is confirming what the majority answers. It's just the barriers that we meet, and we should have a clear view of all these barriers and try to start to build a framework, the complete framework, so that you can determine a horizon where people have to work to. And that is what I meant with the holistic approach. If you start by making it easier to have a digital framework applied by everyone, then it's also easier to apply the standards and work with them, and so on. So I hope you get the drift of my answer.
Christine, I'd like you to build on that, if you could, a little bit about the future of circularity in construction, and maybe what do we need beyond the CPR revision to achieve true circularity?
Yeah, and this is something actually I wanted to add. I think especially, when you talk about small businesses, I think one of the barriers is as well that they know that circularity at the moment is a very theoretical concept, because they know at the moment that it doesn't work this way. And I think if we really want to become truly circular, I think we have to as well basically close the loop when it comes to knowledge. So I think we have to look at the deconstruction processes, of the deconstruction infrastructure, of basically where are materials being transported, how can recycled materials be accessed. And I think this is like the key point, and especially in the construction industry, we have a lot of small businesses working in their local environment, and for them it has to be practical, and it has to be something they can really tap into and can access. And if they know that at the moment, I can just say it for Germany, that, if you deconstruct a building today, the soil they dig out, the mineral materials they get out of the buildings, there's no recycling really happening because it's still not expensive enough. Material is being transported in average like 300 kilometers across Europe with big trucks or by boat. And we see a lot of deconstruction companies there at the same time, small construction companies, because then they're able to close the loop for themselves if they basically get the material out and they can use it somewhere else. And I think that goes through the whole value chain. It doesn't matter in which products you're looking at, and especially the products where we see and what we need if we talk about sustainability is we need long lifespans. So what we build today has to actually last ideally like 100 years. And then the question is what happens in 100 years? And what we deconstruct today was never designed for circularity. And I think this is kind of where we maybe have to bring down the theoretical model and where we have to adapt it as well from other sectors. And I always say it's maybe a bit radical, but a building is not a washing machine. It works differently. We have different processes. We have different lifespans of a building. And I think their regulation has to really maybe go a little bit bottom up and really understand where the points where it just doesn't happen today in the market and what do we need to change that happens in the market. Because to just say circularity is not going to make that transformation. We need to, as I said, we have to build the infrastructure. We have to as well work with the deconstruction companies, with recycling facilities. Cities have to provide the space so material can be stored because that is another challenge they face. So I think this is a more bottom up to bring these two worlds together, I think is what we need to become really circular in this construction industry.
It's interesting that although you're talking from a different sector, you're actually very much echoing what Robin on the first panel said about a holistic approach and bottom up. I see we've got some questions coming in from our audience, and I will remind those of you joining online that you can ask questions. It should be to the right of your screen. If you can't see it, you may have the video on full screen, so just reduce that and you'll be able to type in your question there. I'm going to start with one, I think, that's both to Hein and to Alexandra, asking how the Commission and SEN are cooperating to include SMEs in the revised standardisation system. Hein, let me hear from you first.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have a past life in standardization, and I'm very happy to be here amongst the audience for the Friends of Standardization and the Friends of Construction now, by the way. The cooperation which is taking place is always based, because there are two elements, the European Standardization Regulation and you have the Construction Product Regulation. In the European Standardization Regulation, you have a very strong point on inclusiveness, which is unique in the world with regard to the European standardization system, the inclusiveness element, and also the SMEs have a particular attention there. So there is a very good and working method within SEN, but also within the Commission to cooperate in this triangle of SEN, Commission, and the SMEs, where the Commission, of course, is putting forward standardization requests, mandates, as we know it. With regard to the Construction Product Regulation, we are for the moment involved with stakeholders, SMEs, SEN, industry, member states, what we call in the construction acquis process. And the construction acquis process is for the moment trying to build a bridge between the current construction product regulation and the new one, to make sure that we are ready with the right and appropriate standards, state-of-the-art, and also linked to up-to-date and state-of-the-art standardization requests. And all of this is happening within this very nice triangle of Commission, SEN, SMEs, but also other parties involved, which is for us a highly important issue, is the inclusiveness element.
Alexandra, from your perspective as the chair of one of the SEN working groups on construction, tell us what you see as the main elements of cooperation and involvement of SMEs.
Well, I have to agree with what Hans said. No, that there is a system in place, under the regulation for standardization, not only for construction, but for all the pieces of legislation that are supported by standards. And there is a special attention given to SMEs and how they can be part of that process. Specifically talking about the CPR, yes, there is this acquis process undergoing that is organized by the Commission, where we have several stakeholders participating. but I think that in that case, it is a little bit more difficult for SMEs to be involved because they have to be involved through the member states, probably. I know that SEN is also participating, but I think it's always better if this collaboration, if this participation is done through the SEN standardization system. That's why I was saying before that the new CPR foresees the possibility of the Commission to develop delegated acts in case the standardization system is not working. But this is something really to be only used exceptionally to avoid, because I think that in that case, SMEs will have less opportunities to participate.
Thank you very much. Now, Hein, as always, when there's a new proposal out, people have a lot of very specific technical questions for the Commission. Just a couple of quick ones here, if you have them under your purview. The new CPR sets the ground for the development of environmental product requirements. We don't see any implementation plan yet. When will that be developed? And then another question, for some SMEs, the European assessment document or the European technical assessment route is actually more attractive. And the questioner there is wondering, why will the EADs no longer be considered as the highest technical standards?
Let me go for the last question first. We will keep the IOTA route as it is, and we will keep it as well for the innovative part of the products which are not covered by the harmonized zone for the moment, and that will not change in the future. With regard to that possible implementation pathway that we see in implementing the environmental footprint and requirements, this is something that we actually will do once the Council and the Parliament have come to an agreement on the proposal of the Commission. Of course, we're working on it already with stakeholders, and we're anticipating a little bit those processes. But the negotiation process in the Council Parliament has just started, so we expect this to be somehow concluded, possibly next year or maybe after, and then we possibly know what the final outcome will be of the CPR proposal, and then of course we can come out with some implementing provisions and guidelines for the CPR.
Well, I put you on the spot, Hein, with the questions from our audience. I'm going to, Christine and Philip, put you guys on the spot and tell you, ask what you want from the Commission as part of this. You know, what is your demand that Hein and his colleagues consider in terms of bringing construction SMEs on board to make a more sustainable future?
You're abusing my presence.
I'm absolutely abusing your presence, Hein, to get these questions to you. Christine, I'll let you go first.
Well, this is great. So we can wish whatever we want and then will come reality. No, I think what I said in the beginning, I mean, what we would like to see is that we raise the bar for sustainable products, that we as well harmonize. I think that has been said already several times, that we close the loop and that we make the connection if we talk about sustainable products. What does it mean when it comes to circularity? What does it as well mean for the lifespan of products? And I think what is quite important, and I wanted to say that earlier, is, and I think we need a certain kind of honesty. Just because there are certain terms being used in regulation or in terms, it doesn't mean that, you know, what is sustainable today. So sustainability is more a process. And I think we need roadmaps for that. I think we need a certain kind of transparency on where we stand and where it will go. Because I think, especially for small businesses, sometimes it's really the question, do I start now or do I wait until they revise it again? So I think we need more transparency in terms of what is coming, where are we now? And I think we need terms where basically as well outside of our expert world, the people understand what we mean in terms of reaching the Paris Agreement or reaching certain goals. So yeah, just some easy things, I think, to fulfill. Thank you.
Philip, your big ask, your Christmas wish list for the Commission.
Thank you. Christine already mentioned harmonization because not everything is being governed by European regulation and standards. So on the national level, I think a lot of harmonization can still be done, especially in the field of responsibility, because if responsibility is for the products you make is harmonized, then it will be easier to apply the standards also. It will be stimulated to apply them, sorry. And I think there could be some stimulus in making small ecosystems of cooperation between SMEs working on a local level in order to, for instance, to do the urban mining, which was mentioned earlier, because if on the one hand a specialist has to demolish something, or another one could reuse it, but it doesn't go in the work of the first one. So you need to stimulate cooperation. Furthermore, I think SMEs need a stable, coherent and well-defined policy framework with comprehensive requirements. And the Commission needs to act with proportion regarding additional requirements and provide the means to support construction SMEs in their efforts and challenges to make the European built environment green. I think simplifying as much as possible the technical assessments will work also. And we wanted the European Commission to ensure that the CPR is the only piece of European legislation regulating construction products in order to avoid overlaps and legal uncertainty in the market. And I think that the Commission should better consider the message jointly shared by the main players in the construction industry as to what the sector expects and requires from CPR to prosper while contributing to environmental efforts and addressing digital progress. So our companies are the hands that will deliver mainly the renovation wave and the ambitions of the EU Green Deal regarding built environment. So not taking the needs and warnings into account would severely limit the ability of our companies to deliver sustainability ambitions for the buildings.
Thank you, Philip. Before I get a reaction from Hein, Alexandra, perhaps you'll give us a sneak peek into what the Senelec's response to the Commission consultation will be. What are going to be the key takeaways from you?
Well, I think that what Senelec wish is to have a good collaboration and communication with the Commission, which will allow the standards to be published and cited in the official journal. So we want to avoid the situations that are described now in Article 4.3, which is a list of things that can go wrong and will force the Commission to develop a delegated act to replace a standard. So in cases where the standards are not published on time, they don't cover essential characteristics, they don't cover regulatory needs of member states, or they are not in line with the EU environmental legislation and ambition. So, and to make sure that we cover all these things in the standards, a good collaboration, communication between SEN and the Commission is necessary.
And thank you to all my three remote speakers. Hein, you have got about 1.5 minutes to react to all those requests.
That's great, thank you so much. I would like to go back to the survey that was organized, and one of the points was the lack of availability. This is, I think, an indication of what was said earlier, is that we had to produce a revision of the current CPR to have a forward-looking piece of legislation, a legal framework that is giving legal stability to the industry. And therefore also we had to build in some future-proof elements with regard to the climate and the environmental goals that we have set. And in particular, the regulation, the proposal is speaking about reuse, recyclability, it's talking about longer use, looking at those products groups. So this is one of the concerns that have been expressed. So I like very much that point that was made, and in fact this is a little bit confirming one of the reasons why we have put forward the revision of the current CPR. And this was, of course, linked to raising the bar. With regard to the harmonization that was just said, also with regard to the member states tackling this completely differently, One of the issues that we have discovered as well is that market surveillance in the member states is not working well. There is a lack of resources, be it human resources, financial, and also through that piece of legislation, the revision that we have put forward, we try also to tackle the issue of market surveillance to make sure that there is a level playing field for all actors and the businesses dealing with construction products. Also with regard to the stability and the resilience of the sector, let me also say that in the national plans that have been submitted towards the Commission in the Recovery and Resilience Facility that has been put forward in the post-pandemic era situation, that Member States have proposed for about 60 billion euros of financial support to the construction sector to make all of this happen. And now for the last point with regard to standardization. The acquis process also has one objective, that we get from the member states their regulatory needs up front and not at the very end. So this will also help to speed up a little bit the process, that we better understand what needs to be done. And also secondly, with regard to the cooperation, the communication as just mentioned, we have set up, together with the European Standardization Organization, Sensenelec and ETSI, a task force to look at how mandate standardization requests should be drafted, legally sound, and also responding to the market needs. So these are the different elements which we hope will improve the overall situation, especially for the construction products and the SMEs. Let me also say about the SMEs, actually, that the proposal has a very important feature now, a little bit building on what already exists, is that micro-enterprises can be excluded from some provisions and obligations in the new proposal at national level. So also this is particularly addressing the needs, the strong needs of the SMEs in the construction product field.
Thank you very much for being here in person to take all those questions from our speakers. And thank you very much to those of you online who had a great conversation, as well as, of course, our audience for your questions as well. Stay with us, because we will be turning in just a moment to our last sectoral panel, our last panel of the day, in fact, and we are going to be looking at standards in the sustainable textile sector. So what we're going to be looking at is, like the construction industry, the textile sector has a huge environmental impact, which creates the possibility for some low-hanging fruit to really develop on Europe's aims, like the European Green Deal. So we're going to be looking a little bit at the strategy for sustainable and circular textiles. That's coming up next, so stay with us. Well, welcome back to our final panel today, where, as I mentioned, we are looking at the standards for sustainable textiles. Now, the EU aims to build up a textile industry by fostering sustainable textile design, boosting the circular business models and reducing waste. It's a trio of options. It's one way to help develop that sustainable and green future that we're all talking about. And joining me to discuss this important area is Valeria Botta, Programme Manager at ECOS, Jan Lamme, CEO of Lamme Textile Behir and co-founder of Sibutex, and also Andrea Rechtsteiner, who is the SBS expert and chair of the Sustainability Topic Group at the Senelec Sector Forum on PPE, and Maria Rancon-Liviana, who is the team leader in the Circular Economy, Sustainable Production and Consumption within DG Envy in the European Commission. Thank you all so very much for joining us and for making the time to discuss this issue with us today. I'd like to start, if I may, Maria, let me start with you, actually. We'll go around this way. The Commission launched the EU strategy for sustainable and circular textiles. Why are textiles a priority sector? We just had a long conversation about the construction industry. What is it that makes these particular sectors key? Tell me, what is it key elements about textiles that's so important?
Well, you mentioned some of the elements in your introduction. It has been recently estimated, according to the Environmental Agency, that is one of the highest impact categories in terms of EU consumption as regard of impacts on the environment and climate, immediately after food or housing or mobility. So this gives an idea of the importance of addressing these challenges. It's not only the general impacts of EU consumption, but also the untapped potential that we have, because right now around 5 million, almost 6 million tons of textile are sent to landfill on incineration, to waste, and only 1% at global level is makes it up into new textile. So it's textile recycling is not happening. So there's a lot of resources that are lost there. But I don't want to leave only this negative picture of the sector. It's a key sector for the EU economy and had a key role in ensuring addressing the challenges of the COVID outbreak, and is key for the recovery. So we need to foster as well competitiveness and resilience. And this is the double angle that the strategy that was adopted by the European Commission on the 30th of March puts forward. And the strategy is ambitious in the vision that it lays down for the textile sector by 2030. And we will be looking at textile products that are made to last, to be reused, to be repaired, to be recycled. And we will be addressing as well fast fashion, making it out of fashion, because consumer will have the choice to go for sustainable product, for product that last longer. They have repair and reuse services available. So it's a deep transformation. I'm aware that we really need to support as well SMEs and businesses in this transformation, and as well on the uptake of new recycling infrastructures. And that's why we are also considering putting forward the extension of the responsibility of the producer to cover as well the placing of the market and the end of life of the product, the textile product they put in the market. So in a nutshell, really it's moving the sector towards increased sustainability from the point of view of the environment, and as well from the point of view of social impacts. And we will need to work together with the industry, and specifically with SMEs that are an important piece of the EU economy, to make this happen. Because as much as we are putting the focus on legislation, on eco-design requirements, on empowering consumers, we are fully aware that we need to engage and enable and create the conditions for the textile industry in the EU to thrive, and the standards and harmonization play a key role in achieving these objectives.
Well, Maria there mentioned the word ambitious in terms of what we think we need for the textile sector. In your view, are the proposals that have been put forward by the European Commission the right ones? Are they ambitious enough? What is really needed? What do you think, from your perspective, is needed for a sustainable textiles industry?
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks again to SBS for the invite. I'm glad to share the panel with so many known faces. ECOS is the Environmental Coalition on Standards, and we're an international NGO working for advocating for environmentally friendly technical standards, policy, and law. So we cover quite a lot of ground. And interesting to see how much the construction discussion went in deep into the standardization discussion. So ECOS has 20-year history of working with eco-design. So of course, we're very happy to see the Commission taking over a very big loop and looking into the textile sector with the proposal that we're put forward, indeed with a textile strategy, but also with the Ecodesign for Sustainable Product regulation. I mean, of course, what Maria was already saying, there is quite a lot of focus on textile, and the Commissioner, Vice President Timmermans said that possibly textile will be the first group of products for which they will go forward and look into new eco-design requirements. So that for us, it's a positive step. And of course, as you might have seen, this proposal doesn't have requirement for each product group, which will be discussed in delegated act when the Commission has performed the impact assessment. But indeed, I mean, we have in a lot of things that Maria has already mentioned. So mandatory eco-design requirement, reinforced market surveillance, introduce more transparency with the digital product passport, which is something that we're very much looking forward to. There are some indication with positive steps towards the stop to destruction of unsold goods. But that, of course, we would like to have these a stronger ban and not just reporting requirements. And the definition of unsold could be, especially for the textile sector, there is the excess inventory, dead stock, return items in themselves with e-commerce, which is quite a big issue. So there are highlights for measure to tackle microplastic pollution, which is also a big one. The introduction of EPR for textiles, and the revision of the textile labeling regulation. So, I mean, we have quite a lot on the plate for the next years, and especially for the textile labeling regulation. Hopefully this will clarify some criteria on the made in, which I know is something that, especially for European SMEs, are claiming something made in a number of countries in the European Union. It has a quality to it, so it's good to have those kind of criteria hopefully spelled out more properly in this revision. So we feel that there are a lot of positive steps that can give the right impulse to really transform the market. And we're really hoping that the final bill will show the same level of ambition.
Thank you. Jan, let me turn to you. I know you're involved in different initiatives and different innovative ways of working. Tell us from your perspective what you think are the main challenges, and if you've got ideas about what might be the solutions to delivering sustainability.
Thank you for the opportunity to attend here. I think the main challenges is not only in this sector, but it's in many sectors, it's the same challenge. But when you're looking at implementing the circular business models, what I see is that when you go to new, you have to move from existing models to a circular model. So what I see is that it's important that the companies themselves go in, adapt the new strategy within the company. And what I see at the moment is that many SMEs react to what the legislation is doing, and there are always front runners. But I think it's very important that people are or companies learn to cooperate. So it's also a matter of behavior within the companies that they are not really used to cooperate outside their own company. And I think that is the main challenge. to implement a circular business model.
Finally then, Andrea, let me turn to you as our standards expert on this panel. Give me your perspective on what's needed.
Thank you. Well, I'm not a standards expert. I'm a PPE and textile expert, more or less. I think standards can help address some of these issues, but I think a regulation is needed. Let's fall with the door into the house. And because there's no consistency among the member states, different approaches, every state does something different. There are many individual initiatives and efforts that tie up resources, especially resources of SMEs, and a regulation creates a standardized procedure then and for the assessment of sustainable circular textile product. So standards are needed, and I think regulation is needed, and eco-design regulation too for textiles, because we have nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm going to turn now, as we've done in all our panelists, I'm sure the audience is getting used to this. We have a question for you. We're going to launch a Slido question again. Remember, you can find that online using the hashtag standards4 SMEs, and you can also find it there to the right of your screen if you're following through the platform. The question is, what do you think is the most pressing issue regarding sustainability in textiles that should be addressed? We're leaving this one open. We're not making you choose from the multiple choice, so you can say anything. That could be access to knowledge, access to finance, it could be harmonisation. Whatever you think is the main key challenge, please put that down. What is the biggest issue? And we will get our panellists to talk about it. And remember, you can also ask your questions of them using the Q&A tab. Let me come back around, Maria, to you again and ask you about the strategy and the announcement of the initiative by the end of the year we're expecting on microplastics. Tell us a bit more about this. We heard some references to it already from Valeria. What can you give us an indication about now?
Yeah, thank you very much. It is true. It was mentioned by Valeria, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to further clarify. We are aware that microtextile is one of the major sources of unintentional release of microplastics. These releases happen both during production, but also during the use phase and at the end of life. And we need to be aware that the generation of this microplastic is difficult to address because we need to know more about the sources and how to measure them and how to prevent the release. This is the background of why the Commission decided to put forward an initiative that will cover this issue that impacts the environment. At the beginning, we started with 3 major sources of unintentional release of microplastics: textile tires and pellets. We have expanded the scope to cover now paints, geotextiles, and as well detergent capsules. It's true that we are considering at the moment all possible options. So the impact assessment, it's ongoing. We are in the middle of gathering of data, studies, and consultation to understand better all these elements. And we will consider, of course, all the standardization activities that are ongoing because they are very relevant. But we might need as well to look into a wider approach that look really to the life cycle and the releases that take place along the life cycle of products. We are currently working to have it ready by the end of the year, but of course it's a very complex initiative, and we need to ensure that we gather all the data and ensure the coherence with all the initiatives that are ongoing. For instance, the Ecodesign for Sustainable Product Regulation and the negotiations in the Council and the Parliament. So work is ongoing to have it ready by the end of the year.
Jan, let me turn to you and ask you from your perspective, do you see any gaps, and what do you see as the role of standards or existing standards to help facilitate the uptake of a more sustainable textile industry?
Yeah, I basically see two important points, and one is that in my opinion there should be a standard for recycling. So, like in the labeling of textiles, so that people know how and where a product has to be brought for recycling. So that's on one side. So it's also educating and telling the people who are using the textiles and at the end of the life cycle to be able to bring it to a place. And on the other hand, I think that brands and industries who bring products to the market should be responsible for the whole life cycle. So they bring something into the market, and I think it's their responsibility to tell their buyers where to bring it after the use. So I think it's also something that should be added to the legislation for recycling.
Well, I think let's have a look, if we can, at what our audience has been saying. We should have a Slido word cloud there to see. Absolutely, you can see there durability is the big one, but I can also see reuses in there twice, as well as local content. Labelling is one issue there. Circular design, master plastic, microplastics, prolonging the use phase, and a few there that seem to be tied together. Fast fashion is in there twice. We also see consumer education, consumption patterns, and consumer demand. Perhaps tie all of those together. They make up quite a big area, maybe in terms of how to bring that to the end consumer. Microplastics, again, a big one. You can keep voting on that, but you can also ask questions. Andrea, let me turn to you and get your reaction to that cloud.
Okay, I'll just take it away, and Jennifer, take your breath. So indeed, what I think it's missing over there is that the most environmentally friendly, of course, products are the ones that are not produced yet. We know that there is an overproduction of textile, that we just have one planet, and there are indications that indeed we're reaching the material use date for our planet earlier and earlier in the year. So there is a need to set up a resource reduction target to address overproduction and reduce the volumes. Okay, Andrea, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I think durability plays a very, very strong part, because I think we have to work on durability instead of recycling. Recycling is a very, very difficult part on textiles. So let me come back. We don't have any standards, any regulation for textiles. There is nothing but the EU eco label. There is not Ecodesign label, and I think there must be a clear definition which textiles there are, and there must be clear definitions how durability. Yes, we have to have durability requirements for textiles, and the bar has to be very high, because there are good examples of existing solutions, of existing services also. And Jan, your company is one of the services who is responsible for durability also. And there has to be quality features for the material, for the construction of the material, that plays a very strong part. how the construction of the fabric is, how the construction of the garment is, or the textile at all. So, and you have to repair the ability to be repaired has to be there. So the durability less long of a textile. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Valerie and Andrea, for looking in. Excuse me. Maria, I do want to come back to you and ask you about how front and centre SMEs are when you're considering these proposals.
Of course, it's clear that they are at the core of these proposals. We cannot disregard the fact that they are at the backbone of the EU economy. It's more than 90% of the industrial fabric in the EU. So it's clear that we have them in mind when looking at the coherence and the implementation of all the measures we have introduced. Together with the strategy, the Commission has also launched an exercise to gather businesses, public authorities, consumers together around the table to discuss the different measures of the strategy and as well to understand better what are the barriers and challenges. And for that, we have launched what we call in European jargon the transition pathway for the textile ecosystem. That is nothing more than gathering stakeholders around the table to discuss and to gather views on what is needed to implement the strategy and the actions in the strategy. And I think their SMEs have a forum to share the good practices, but also the challenges. We see that for the textiles SMEs, there's a shortage of skills, so we will be supporting the uptake of new skills within SMEs, both digital, but as well all the skill linked to the eco-design. There's as well support coming from different sources of funding for the uptake of new circular business model, and Jan was mentioning as well the changes are need to take internally in the company to really produce these sustainable products and to make this transition as inclusive and easy for everyone as possible. I also want to mention the role of the social economy and the role of SMEs to contribute to this with repair and reuse activities is key as well for the textile sector.
Well, thank you, Maria. It's good to hear that, of course, SMEs are the backbone. But let me turn now to a question from our audience. Jan, let me ask you about how can we see standards positively as a way to incentivize products, to reward front runners, to reward those producers who are taking the lead in producing sustainable products, but therefore also indirectly sort of incentivizing the laggards to keep up. Do you see that as a possibility, as one of our audience members has suggested?
I think incentives for good behavior or for the good work would really move companies in the right direction. On the other hand, I think that also legislation is needed to move other companies who are not so proactive, let's say, to move them in that way. So, in my opinion, it should be that a sustainable product should be cheaper than a conventional product. At the end, that should be something that's that in my vision that should be at the end where we have to be.
You agree with that? Valerie.
Sorry?
Jennifer, thank you. I think we lost you a second there. What did you ask? Okay. Sorry?
I'm just asking, I presume you agree with Jan's statement that, a sustainable product rather, should always be the more affordable one.
So the fact is that for the moment, environmental and social externalities of textile have not been included in the product at all. So whatever aspect we will need to move towards to clearly will account for those aspects within the price as well, making indeed like sustainable products the one that take into account all these other aspects that were so environmental and social externalities internalized, and that will be making them the most affordable one. I mean, just because we don't have any more planet to do other things on. And I agree. I mean, it's very not surprising, of course, coming from this forum, but we are also asking for a stronger regulation in this industry because it's gone under the radar for so long. And Andrea was saying as well that there are so many standards that are still needed and things that will be needed to come. So very strong regulation supported by strong standard is needed.
Let me turn, Andrea, to you, because Andreas Schumacher is asking, how can new standards not only bring improvement for the environment, but also perhaps create new services, for example, repairing, recycling, or the product as a service? Have you given any consideration to that? What do you think about those as potential ideas?
First of all, I wanted to say to Valeria, sorry to say that, but not to Valeria, but the most sustainable textile is the one that isn't bought. So textiles have to be very, very durable. So, and that is in contradiction to sustainable textiles have to be very affordable and very cheap, though that's not working. So coming back to Andrea's question, I forgot about it, sorry. So can you please
Certainly. It was
say it again.
Andreas was suggesting that not only an improvement in the environment by looking at these sorts of models, but perhaps new innovative business models like repairing, recycling, or even product as a service as a a new idea.
Yeah, the textile service, for example, the laundries are circular services. They hold textiles into the circle, repair it. There are a lot of internal standards to repair, internal standards to carry it more easily, to hold the textile more efficient in the circle, and the laundries and the textile service is a business model, a circular business model in that. Yeah.
Maria, perhaps this is a question from you, but there's a question here regarding standards from one of our audience members asking how we can ensure alignment of SEN and ISO standards. Do you have any thoughts on the idea of harmonization of standards, how that may make life easier, particularly for smaller businesses?
Yeah, whatever brings clarity and certainty, I think it's really appreciated for businesses that are normally facing the difficulties of understanding everything that is going on at EU level, at national level. And as well, we are talking here about very complex files in the sense that only with the regulation on sustainable product, we will be talking of different measures. And whereas I see the trade-off of durability and recyclability and understanding what are the hotspots. So in a sense, the standardization activities help out as well SMEs to implement this measure and to achieve these objectives. I'm sorry, I don't know how to ensure the coordination between ISO and Senelec. Maybe Valeria can help me out here if she knows. If not, I'll happy to follow up in written.
Well, Valeria, I was going to come to you next anyway. I don't know if you do want to take that question.
No, of course. I mean, there is quite a lot of work that is happening at SEN level and ISO level to standardize like definition and ways to account for characteristics for certain products. And indeed, harmonization is usually appreciated, especially when it comes to definition for certain like circular economy or within there is a SEN working group. We're working on circular textile, coming up with a new work item proposal. So there are things that indeed will make likely, let's say, share an harmonized view of what we mean by certain things. That will be helpful. Then when it comes to harmonization within CEN and ISO, there is a lot of standards that are under Vienna Agreement, which means that indeed they're valid for both. And I'm sure that we can go on about how to make sure that those things get harmonized more in the future. But then the European Union has also quite a clear regulation framework to go forward with these things, and can set sometime the inspiration if we want. But did you have a specific question for me, Jennifer?
I actually had another question for you, and I want to Jan as well as a follow-up, which is, how do we create a balance between the differing objectives as sustainability, durability, even something like safety, if we think about PPE and so on in terms of textiles, because it isn't just fast fashion, it is also other sorts of textiles. Is there a formula, or is there some way of thinking about this that can maybe create a balance between them all? Valeria, that was to you.
Yes. So actually, I mean, of course, PPE for me is quite a separate category when it comes to categorizing textile product because of the safety aspect. So everything that is related to PPE, I think there are some things that are specific for that category. And of course, sustainability, durability, and safety can very easily coexist. Again, I think that we need a holistic view of what we think about sustainability, what we think about quality of products, what we think about durability, because of course there is quite a lot of issue with like physical durability, so textile strength, abrasion, etc. And what we were saying earlier, so the used material, the construction of the yarn, the construction of the fabric, the length of the fiber, the shape of the fiber, so many parameters influence quality. And actually it can always very be that tensile strength will have a very different ranges when it comes to, of course, polyester than cotton. So for some of these things, there are some specific consideration that needs to apply. And though all of those things need to coexist together. I mean, of course, the durability, the product's extension of lifetime is the key focus to all of this circular economy thinking, and having the higher value to products to continue and be kept in the circle. And then, of course, I mean, the repair, the reuse, the upcycle, the remanufacture, all of these things need to be front and center as well.
Well, Jan, I wanted to bring you in as well to talk about balance between different, perhaps competing, but also perhaps complementary objectives, and also to introduce this idea of managing waste. Because in an ideal circular economy or a circular product, there would be none. But we don't yet live in an ideal world. Tell us what your perspective is.
Jan, you're muted.
No, we don't hear you now. Oh, okay. Jan is restarting, in which case, Andrea, perhaps you can give us your perspective. I mean, we're coming to the end of our conversation now. How do you see the key elements all working together, and what would be your takeaway for the audience, if that's policymakers, if that's people who are interested in getting involved as innovators, if that's more fellow SMEs and so on? What would be your takeaway to them in terms of all these different factors and how we deal with them in some sort of hierarchy or in some sort of circle?
Again, sorry. As I said before, there are no standards at all for textiles. We don't have a standard for durability. We don't have a standard for recyclability, for on a product level to assess a product to be sustainable or circular. and the needs of SMEs have to be taken into account. When there are no standards that are easy to understand and clear, and the implementation does not require additional resources, and that profit from sustainable action is maintained. So we need standards that does not require third-party certification. And there must be a clear classification based on certain parameters that makes the product accessible. And I think durability, safety for PPE, for example, and sustainability can coexist. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Jan, I think you're back. Have we ironed out the gremlins? Can we hear you? Yes, great, we can. So I'd like you to take into account those questions we're asking, but also another one that's just come in from our audience asking, how can consumers be convinced to purchase more sustainable textiles ahead of disposable ones?
What do you mean with comparison with disposable ones?
It's a question from our audience member asking, how do we convince consumers? How do we make the case that sustainability is good?
In the first panel, there was Robin talking about the product passport. So if companies add on like a product passport to the product with a labeling or whatever, people can be informed about where the product is coming from, how it is made. So I think that's very important. It's also for brands or for textile service companies to tell the right story. So I think awareness also from the consumer, that's very important issue, what is not addressed yet in today in the whole conversation, because companies can make the most sustainable products, but still consumers have to buy it and use it. And I think that's also a part what has to be included in the whole program, is that consumer awareness, because for years and years, textile companies produced a lot of products and pushed it into the market. So basically, buying textiles is often done by marketing of the big brands, and I think consumers has to look at another way to textile products.
Well, thank you. We're coming to the close now of this panel. So I just want to give Valeria, I think we haven't heard from you, just what would be your big ask going forward from the policymakers or from the Commission or from those watching?
I mean, clearly for me, there needs to be a reduction in volume. So the European Union, there is a consultation still ongoing on monitoring the circular economy framework. We need to put a clear analytical, so there are some objectives that we want to fulfill within the circular economy. We want to go there, and how do we do it? And there needs to be a target on reducing resource use, because this is unbelievably unsustainable. And indeed, continue to expand the life of textile that have a high potential. There is high potential to move towards circular business model. So for me, the biggest ask is indeed to tackle as well the volumes. And for standardization aspects, because I mean, of course, I know that we are all here coming from this. We've heard that microplastic is an issue. I mean, and we've heard it from the Commission. There is a series of standards that are almost ready, that will be able to have a shared methodology to account for microplastic shedding, and hopefully then with a methodology go forward to tackle that.
Thank you. Jan, in just a short, brief segment, What's your key wish list?
Yeah, I think guidelines for brands, but also legislation. That's, I think, very important. And also, I think there should be a penalty on overproduction, so overstock and not using textiles. Yeah, that's, I think, the most. Yeah, the biggest issue maybe is the overproduction and which goes to landfill or other purposes, or so I think that's very important.
Andrea, a very quick takeaway from you.
We need a eco-design guideline, eco-design regulation, or for textiles. That's my big wish.
And finally, then, I will give the floor to Maria. Are you going to be able to deliver on all these wishes from a policy perspective?
Well, we will try, because the vision that the strategy sets for textile covers many of these things. We will be talking about eco-design for textile that make them last longer, incorporate recycled content, and in a way, by keeping this idea of textile, we will also be reducing the input of resources going to textiles. That is basically what Valeria would like to achieve, that we reduce consumption of natural resources. It's not a challenging scenario that I'm putting forward. I'm fully aware of the needs to work together and to bring it to a common scenario and transform it into a joint agenda. I think that there's a consensus around the table on the need to increase the sustainability of textiles, because it brings savings for companies and gives consumers what they are seeking, and then it's good for the environment. And these three elements are the final goals at the end.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you indeed, all our speakers, ladies and gentlemen, and of course you, the audience at home, for your questions. That is our concluding panel for today's discussion, but we are coming up next with some closing remarks and a final wrap-up from the Secretary-General of the Small Business Standards, Mateane Olabarria. So don't go far, that's coming up next. Welcome back to our final closing wrap-up of today's very inspiring discussion, and I am delighted to have joining me in the studio the Secretary-General of the Small Business Standards, Mateane Olabarria. Mateane, thank you so much for today, for helping to put together this great lineup of speakers who really covered a lot of different areas. We dealt with very disparate textile and construction sectors. We've talked about the whole product passport. Tell me, from a general point of view, what have your big conclusions from the discussion today?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. It is, I think, quite a challenge to try to summarize the main points of the discussion today. The first point, I think that was quite clear from the discussions, is the fact that both SMEs and standards are key for the implementation of the Commission proposals. I think in all the panels, we heard about the need for standards to support the digital product passport, to help more sustainable, durable products take up in the market. We also heard about the need of standards to implement the construction products regulation. So I think this is one of the main conclusions. We need standards. As I said, we also have to realize that SMEs are really the backbone of the common economy. You said that yourself. And I think in that sense, it is also important that these standards really have SMEs on board when they are being developed. Because only in this way we can ensure that we have standards that are easy to implement and really take into account what SME needs. So for me, that was one of the first conclusions. I think the second conclusion has to do with transparency. Transparency, the need to share information. I think one of the main obstacles when we are talking about the a circular economy is basically the lack of sharing of information between the different actors in the value chains. So it is very important, and the digital product passport can help to do that. But there are also some challenges we heard associated to it. The issue of data, how you ensure you share data, but only the data you need in order to ensure that you are not sharing sensitive data related to a product or a company. We also need to ensure that it's easy to implement for SMEs, that the information is user-friendly. And I think what is also important to take into account is how we will make this digital product passport interact with other existing databases that are also set up in other regulations at EU level. So how can we ensure that this is put in place without putting too much administrative burden and multiple reporting requirements on SMEs? I think I also heard a lot about the need for training, upskilling, knowledge. So this is also a conclusion. We also need to work on this. And then the last point I wanted to mention is harmonization. I think that came up quite a lot. We heard about the fact that there are different regulations, different approaches in different countries. So it is an important aspect that we need to tackle with standards, but not only with standards, with regulations as well. We heard about that today. And final point, and then I really finish, I think we also need to take into account in the discussion, and it also came up, the issue of international supply chains and the fact that we need to bear in mind that many SMEs are part of international supply chains. So this also needs to take into account when we're talking about harmonization.
Well, many of those things point to different challenges. Is there one that stands out? Is there one particular challenge that you see?
When I was listening to the conversation, I think from my point of view, there are two big challenges. The first one has to do with ensuring coherence of different pieces of legislation. We heard that from the area of construction. There were some questions about specifically personal protective equipment as well. We have regulation regarding safety. How is this going to interact with eco-design regulation? So I think it's important that we try to have a coherent set of regulations, and this also goes to standardization. We need to have a coherent set of standards. And for this, it is very important, and we heard it, collaboration. And we need to cooperate with standardization bodies at European and international level. But I think we also need to cooperate between different stakeholders. And when we are talking about the digital product passport, for example, and we are developing standards in that area, we need experts from the digital world, we need experts from the different sectors, and I think this is also a challenge.
Well, those are the challenges. And I mean, as you said, there's no one size fits all. SMEs might be small or medium, but they're also incredibly diverse. Is there one point that you would say you were most optimistic about from today's conversation?
I think probably what I'm optimistic about is the fact that I think there has never been a better case for the circular economy. We heard at the beginning about the Ukraine war, we heard about the COVID crisis, and I think if there is something positive we can take out of that is the fact that this has raised awareness and also helped to make the case for more circular business models, for the circular economy, and for the need to better use our resources, reuse them, also to be more resilient, actually, which is the key word that you mentioned at the beginning. And finally, I also think it was mentioned during the conversation, and I totally agree, there are challenges, but there are also a lot of opportunities for SMEs. We talk about the digital product passport. The digital product passport, I think, has the potential, if it's implemented right, and if we have the right framework regarding regulations and standards that are easy to implement for SMEs, I think it has the potential to create new businesses, new revenue for SMEs at the local level. They are the ones that are mainly involved in reuse, refurbishment, etc., repair of products. So I think there is a lot of potential there for SMEs.
I think so, because of course small doesn't just mean small, it can also mean lean and agile and adaptable. So a final question then to wrap up. What's your big ask of policymakers? I asked it of a lot of the panelists as well. So I'm keen to hear your takeaway overall, what you think you want to hear next.
Well, for me, what is key is to take into account SMEs in the implementation of the proposals. That's key. We heard already that, for example, the Ecodesign regulation has a specific article to give incentives to SMEs. This is good, but I also think we need incentives also for SMEs to get further involved in the standards that are going to make that are going to support the implementation of these regulations. So we need also more support, also financial support for SMEs to get further involved in the standardization in these areas. We have the regulation also talks about the Ecodesign Forum. We need SMEs, we need really to have SMEs there to participate in the discussion on the actual implementation of this general framework. And finally, this came up very much in the construction products regulation panel, but it's also in the Ecodesign regulation. The Commission is now putting in new pieces of legislation the possibility to develop technical specifications or common specifications in case we don't have standards. We understand this is just, let's say, a backup in case standards are not developed. But I think what is key, if this is done, it's important that SMEs are also involved in the process. So this is what, basically to sum up, what I would ask is count with us to make sure that the measures you implement are really going to be SME friendly and they are going to be successful.
Well, thank you very much for that and for that very difficult job of summing everything up from so many different areas today. And of course, I know that what you've heard today will, of course, feed into the Small Business Standards Organisation's response to the Commission proposals in a formal way. So thank you very much for that. And that concludes today's event.
If I may, Jennifer, I also wanted to use the opportunity to thank you as well for the moderating today's event. Also to all the speakers. I really personally enjoyed very much the discussions. I really learned a lot from them, and as you said, it will fit in our position. And also to all the people that are online and have been following us. But I cannot go without thanking my team, which have done also an excellent job in putting all the event together. And of course, Tessa Delville, who is our communication manager, who had the leading role in doing that.
Well, Maitane, thank you very much. Very well done. You've done my job for me. I was just going to thank a lot of people as well. So I will say, though, do keep the conversation going online. You've got that hashtag standards for SMEs. You can use that on social media, get your colleagues involved and spread the word, because it's always an ongoing discussion with these aims towards circularity and towards the future. And one final reminder for those of you who've been following along today, the Small Business Standards Annual Conference, that you should also register to the conference of the Annex 3 partner ECOS. We heard Valeria speaking earlier. So that's tomorrow. There is a conference on, it's called Ecodesign as a Tool for Change. So please do get involved and follow them as well. As I say, everyone wants to hear from all the stakeholders. So have a great day and keep the conversation going. Thank you.